Good morning, and thank you for joining CQ Roll Call and Transport Topics for today's virtual event symposium, The Future of Freight and Supply Chain Management. My name is Josh RESNIK, and I'm the Publisher and Chief Content Officer at CQ Roll Call. I'm delighted to be joined by Transport Topics Publisher, Sue Hensley.
Thanks, Josh. Today's discussion is the first of a two-part event series co-produced by CQ Roll Call and Transport Topics. This joint partnership is designed to engage a vital national conversation, spotlighting the intersection of global industry and federal policy, as well as convening the expertise of both policymakers and business leaders.
Breaking down congressional politics and analyzing national policy is in CQ Roll Call's DNA. Transport Topics makes a business of informing executives in trucking and freight transportation, giving those who move goods the best possible picture of the environment in which they operate. Together, we seek to investigate the strength of the supply chain and plans for the future of our infrastructure. Before we kick off the symposium, I'd like to set the tone for today's program. COVID-19 has been a wake-up call to many businesses and their ability to mobilize rapidly, set up crisis management mechanisms, and build the supply chain resilience to see them through to the other side. While some businesses ground to a halt, others race to meet demand spikes. As some regions move past the most acute phase of the pandemic and start to plan for recovery, industry leaders are rethinking risk-associated costs. In an increasingly volatile, interconnected world, supply chain networks need to account for political, climate-related, and health disruptions when considering their resiliency strategy.
I'd now like to introduce the first session of today's symposium. We were delighted to speak with U.S. Secretary of Transportation ELAINE CHAO on how the Department of Transportation plans to support the trucking industry as the pandemic and its ripple effect persist. Interviewing the Secretary is Transport Topics Associate Editor Dan Ronan, who also hosts Transport Topics Radio on SiriusXM each week. Now I'll turn things over to Dan and Secretary CHAO to get today's program started.
Welcome to this first joint venture with Transport Topics and CQ Roll Call. I'm Dan Ronan, the Associate News Editor at Transport Topics. We're pleased to welcome our first guest, the Honorable ELAINE CHAO. She is the 18th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation. In her distinguished career in government, the Secretary has had extensive experience in the transportation realm, serving as both the Commissioner and Chair of the Federal Maritime Commission and Deputy Secretary of Transportation in the George H.W. Bush administration. She has also served as the Director of the Peace Corps and head of the United Way of America. And during President George W. Bush's administration, Secretary CHAO served 8 years as the Secretary of Labor, making her the longest serving Labor Secretary since Frances Perkin, who was the Secretary during the Franklin Roosevelt administration. With the election of President Donald Trump in 2016, Secretary CHAO again found herself in public service and back at the DOT, being chosen to head the Department of Transportation, where she has been the Secretary now for nearly 4 years. Secretary CHAO, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're in an election year with just weeks to go before we begin voting. Congress and the White House, as you know, are in full election mode. Congress and the White House are also taking steps to extend the FAST Act for another year. Is an extension the best way to go right now, given the calendar with about a month or so before we get to the voting?
Well, as you mentioned, the FAST Act, which was for 5 years, is expiring on September 30th. We've actually been providing technical assistance to the Congress as it put together, a draft extension of the Surface Highway Bill. Congress has now introduced a 1-year extension, as you mentioned, and that will take it over to like September 30th, 2021. And this measure would appropriate about $13.6 billion from the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund, which needs the money, and then about $10.4 billion into the highway account, $3.2 billion into mass transit. And the president has always said, that any infrastructure bill needs to be bipartisan. But I think it's better, 1 year is better than 3 months. But clearly for the regulated community or the recipient community, they would love it if it were a longer term. We should be thinking strategically and long term to address the infrastructure needs of our country and increase, our economic competitiveness and productivity. So we stand ready to work with Congress on a long-term measure to address the nation's infrastructure needs, because certainty for the states as they plan for their transportation futures is very important.
Yeah, as you were saying, Secretary, the local DOTs and the road commissioners, they like the road builders, they like to know how much money's coming, how much money they can spend, when it can be spent.
Absolutely, because they've got a long-term plan, because a road or a bridge doesn't take a year to finish being built. You know, it's a multi-year process for the roads now. I think on average it's 16 years. So to have a certainty of funding, to have a certainty of timeline, you know, that all helps the states to plan longer term, and in so doing, provide better services basically to their constituencies within their own state.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which you oversee, has an interim administrator in the person of Mr. Wiley Deck, who's running the agency now. He's the second person to lead FMCSA since Ray Martinez left more than a year ago to go up to New England. If there is a second Trump administration, if the president is reelected, what type of person would you recommend to be tasked to lead this important agency?
Hey, can I just also just point out one thing?
Please.
You know, we had Jim Mullen, and then we had Wiley Deck, and we had Ray Martinez. They were all excellent public servants. Ordinarily, under ordinary times, if the Senate were more collegial, these would be permanent leaders of FMCSA. Unfortunately, the confirmation process is now so fractured and so partisan that it's almost impossible. This administration has well over 285 nominees still outstanding. We have ambassadors who have been nominated in 2017 who never got a chance to serve our country and to go overseas because they were never confirmed. So that's a real problem. But as you mentioned, in August, we announced Wiley Deck as the deputy administrator at FMCSA because that was all we could do. We could not bring him to nomination because, again, the nominations confirmation process is so broken at this point. And Wiley brings to the role a deep understanding of the trucking industry. I mean, you all know that he previously served as senior policy advisor in the office of the secretary, and he was down in FMCSA before that as director of government affairs. You know, at its core, the primary mission of FMCSA is safety, just as it is across all the department. So FMCSA has been laser focused on improving safety on our roadways, but also reducing unnecessary, burdensome, duplicative, outdated regulations that do not promote safety. And so we're very proud of the fact that we have done a great deal to make regulations more commonsensical. And these last few months have been a challenging time, as we all know, for the trucking industry. So FMCSA and the entire department have worked to be good partners for America's truckers. And in the months ahead, we'll continue to listen and work with stakeholders as we emerge from COVID-19. And then, as we all know, in the second term, we all work at the pleasure of the president.
So, but it sounds like, though, from your description of your relationship with Mr. Deck, that if the president would be reelected, he would be someone who could be tasked to lead this agency.
You know, I would never overstep my bounds. That is the president's decision. A presidential appointment, Senate confirmed, means just that. It's the president's choice. But Wiley has certainly done a great job, and he certainly has my trust, as does the senior leadership of the Department of Transportation.
What are your own plans, Madam Secretary, if the president were to win re-election November 3rd? Would you like to continue serving as DOT Secretary? You have a long history of being in 2 terms in an administration, dating back to the Bush administration. Would that be something you'd like to do?
Well, I think that's putting the cart before the horse. That's the expression. You know, I think we're all very much focused on what we're doing to improve the lives of truckers every single day. We're very much focused on doing the work of the American people. And I know that the campaign and the president's campaign is focused on winning the election, and then it's going to be up to the voters as to what's going to happen. And then after that, it's up to the president. We all serve, again, at the pleasure of the president. We would never presume to second guess or to get ahead of him in terms of what he wants to do.
What do you think, Madam Secretary, has been your own accomplishment in the agencies, the department's biggest accomplishment over the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years now? What do you think?
I think we have tried to lead this department in very commonsensical ways. We understand that Americans are hardworking people and that they want to be able to take care of their families, conduct their lives as they see it, and they don't want the government to hinder them or hamper their efforts. They want the government to facilitate. And at the Department of Transportation, our efforts are guided by 3 priorities. And people have heard me say this repeatedly. Number 1 priority is safety. We want your truckers to be able to get home safely to their loved ones and their families at night. Secondly, the president is very clear about wanting to rebuild and refurbish our country's critical infrastructure. And third, we've got to be preparing for the future by engaging with emerging technologies to address legitimate public concerns about safety, security, and privacy, but without hampering innovation. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done in all 3 of these areas. On safety and regulatory reform, the department has been a leader in eliminating unnecessary regulations that inhibit economic growth and innovation while continuing to advance safety. Because when the government is too prescriptive and the rules and regulations are too confusing, that actually hampers safety. So on the regulatory front, as examples, we have reformed the hours of service rules. We have instituted what's called rules on rules to make rules more consistent. We have done a whole host of other things on the regulatory front for the trucking industry. I mean, you know, we still remember not only hours of service, but so many, going into New York City, the truckers were facing a 14-day quarantine period, but that made no sense. So we negotiated on their behalf with the city and state of New York to enable truckers to be able to come in and out of New York, deliver the essential materials and supplies that New Yorkers want, but then be able to get on and with the rest of their business. We also worked with state and local governments as well. I mean, for a while, I was really concerned that truckers had no food. At these highway rest stations. I mean, for a while there, they were even closed, so that truckers had to pull off to the side of the road, which is very unsafe. So we again worked with state departments of transportation to open up the rest areas. And then secondly, we actually waived a regulation that disallowed food trucks from being able to be at these rest stops, but the restaurants are closed. So we allowed private food trucks to go to these rest areas and supply hopefully delicious food, nourishing food for the truckers. So a lot of just common sense things like that. And also a lot of truckers were concerned about renewing their licenses, which had expired, but the state departments of transportation were closed. So we gave temporary waivers. Or another one was they had to fulfill their training requirements, but the state departments were closed. So we gave them temporary exemptions and waivers for that as well. So I think that we think the role of government is to help people get on with their lives, to make a living, so they can spend more time with their loved ones. And so I hope we've done that. That's a long answer, but I'm, as you can see, really passionate. The third one, obviously, is innovation. And we want, again, we're not promoting innovation, but it's going to come. So what are we doing to engage with these new technologies to make sure that they're safe, that they're secure? Because any one of these systems, if they were hijacked or hacked into, can be security risks. And then, of course, privacy issues. You don't want all this, all data, to be embedded in these softwares that will give information that truckers perhaps and other people don't want to give out. So, for example, we've done a lot with, innovation in terms of facilitating other kinds of innovation. For example, Net Council The Net Council is something that enables different innovations, different technologies encompassing different modes that will be able to address an easier access point for the department. And then, of course, we've been working with commercial space, launch and re-entry, with drones. So we're just keeping up with what's happening. We don't want to hamper innovation, because if we do, and if we hold back all this technology, it will actually hurt us as a country in terms of our ability to compete overseas, because other nations are embarking upon all these new transportation technologies. And we want to make sure that we still remain the innovative leaders of the world, where we are improving the quality of life for people around the globe.
Secretary CHAO, since February and the onset of the pandemic, there's been a lot of discussion about how the truck drivers, the men and women who are out there on the roads, have really gotten a huge public relations boost in terms of now they're looked upon in many communities as firefighters, doctors, and others who are those first responders that we hear so much about. Would you agree with that? And what do you say to those men and women who have been out there, the heroes doing the hard work, the daily slog that needs to be done?
I think we're going through a very difficult time in our country's history. I've always had tremendous respect for first responders. I think they are so essential to saving our lives. And I wish that we can thank them more, not less. So under this administration, in this department, we partner with first responders, and we want to make sure that their jobs are made easier, not harder, by our actions.
What are going to be some of the top goals in the second Trump administration for transportation? Should Mr. Trump be reelected in November? What would be some of the things you'd like to see pushed forward?
Well, I think we will continue to focus on infrastructure. The administration submitted a bill last February 12, 2018, and unfortunately, it was not accepted on a bipartisan basis. The president has always said that infrastructure should be done on a bipartisan basis, because there's no politics in infrastructure. You know, your truckers are going over roads that have huge, gullies in them. That's not good for their trucks. That's not good for the efficient delivery of services. I mean, of goods and of services. So we need to have good infrastructure. It's part of our competitiveness as well. It adds to our productivity increases, and it also contributes to the quality of life. So in the meantime, while we have not been able to have an infrastructure bill, the department has distributed well over $200 billion plus, to enhance, repair, and rebuild America's infrastructure. So I suspect that this will continue to be a huge topic for the next Trump administration, for the next term of the Trump administration. And secondly, in the previous 8 years prior to this administration, urban America got most of the federal resources. Rural America was terribly neglected and overlooked. I come from rural America. I come from the proud state of Kentucky. And I know that rural America is not looking for a handout. They are just looking for equitable distribution of federal resources. So I think that we will continue to pay appropriate attention to rural areas, because even though smaller population lives in rural America experiences higher than their proportionate level of accidents and fatalities. And while urban dwellers may think, what do rural roads have to do with me? Any one day, 44% of urban dwellers travel on rural roads. So the state of rural roads and bridges in particular are important, not only to rural America, but to all Americans. And so to that end, I've launched something called the Routes Initiative. It's a historic investment in opportunity zones and in rural America. We're not being prejudicial, not quite the contrary. What happens is rural America doesn't have the money, to to hire the armies of people that urban America has to compete for grant dollars. And so what we have initiated with the Routes Initiative is to pay attention to the questions and needs of rural America and to basically give them kind of a toolkit to allow them to map for themselves where they can find the government resources they need to invest in themselves. And it's a black box, because when you deal with the government, you can understand that, you know, we're huge, we're bureaucratic, we're siloed. It's hard to find resources and the right place to go in a federal government bureaucracy. So the Routes Initiative, basically, it's on our website, www.dot.gov. There's a little link to Routes Initiative, and people can, counties, municipalities, state and local governments can click onto that link and again, find the toolkit that would tell them, you know, where they can find the pots of money for their particular projects.
Secretary, we've only got a couple minutes left, and I want to get a couple of questions in before we conclude our discussion. The agency, FMCSA, recently announced a new pilot program to build in some flexibility for the hours of service rule. And as you know, that's a very controversial, and it's been discussed for many, many years. What are going to be the goals for the DOT in this program? How would you measure this as being successful when we get to that point?
Well, first of all, we're going to listen. Okay, that seems like so unusual. We're going to listen to the public and also to the stakeholder community. I think we owe them that. We are public servants. We are not the wisdom, and we are not the fountain of all wisdom, quite the contrary. We need to be seeking comment. And so on August 28th, the department announced that we're looking for public comment on a pilot program to allow additional regulatory relief on the hours of service. And we're thinking about allowing participating drivers to pause their on-duty driving period with one off-duty period up to 3 hours. So this pilot program, it's scheduled to operate for 3 years or less, will gather evidence to analyze the safety and the feasibility of such a modification to the hours of service rules. And again, we want to hear directly from drivers about, you know, what they think about this idea, what they think about the safety aspects of this, and what their ideas are as well. So please encourage your audience, drivers, motor carriers, and those who are interested to provide comment. Again, this pilot program is just another step that the department is taking to explore ways to improve safety on our roadways while increasing flexibility for truckers who do so much to keep our supply chains open and to keep our economy strong.
As I said at the outset, Madam Secretary, you served in previous Republican administrations. As one who was the Labor Secretary for 8 years, how would you describe this 4 years in government as compared to your 8 years as the Labor Secretary?
Well, you know, generally speaking, we who are on the Republican side, and I'm not being partisan, it's just stating facts. We are right of center, and then the other party is left of center. And generally speaking, we tend to be, we tend to trust the individual more, and we trust the private sector more. And we don't think that, again, we know all the answers. And I would hope that we listen more, and that we are more willing to provide regulatory reform that allows greater flexibility to the individual drivers. Because again, we believe that they know best, you know, how to conduct their own lives, do their own business, and you know, they would know how best to schedule their own days. So these are some of the things of which we are exploring. We want safety, obviously, to be the #1 concern, but is there a better way to achieve this? How do we, and I think there are people, many of us, who believe that we can actually make safety better, enhance safety, if we had better regulations that were more commonsensical, and that were not so complicated, so confusing. And so many times, so much of the regulations are at odds with one another. So when federal regulations and state and local regulations are duplicative, outdated, overly burdensome, confusing, and conflicting, they actually work against safety on the roads.
Secretary CHAO, it's been a pleasure to chat with you for the last 20 or 25 minutes here on what has been the first inaugural edition of a joint venture between Transport Topics and CQ Roll Call. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to chat with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad I'm able to kick this off for you.
Thank you. We want to thank Department of Transportation Secretary ELAINE CHAO for today's keynote interview. Please continue to tune in during the remainder of today's inaugural virtual summit brought to you by Transport Topics and CQ Roll Call. Don't miss the rest of today's program, which we're excited to bring to you. We'll have insightful interviews from leaders in transportation, from Capitol Hill to some of the country's largest freight carriers. I'm Dan Ronan. Thanks again for watching.
Thank you to Dan and Secretary CHAO. Our next newsmaker interview is with Senator Ben Cardin, ranking member on the Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Interviewing the senator is CQ Roll Call's transportation reporter, Jessica Warman. Jessica's interview will begin shortly.
Good morning. I'm Jessica Warman. I'm the transportation and infrastructure reporter for CQ Roll Call, and I am thrilled today to introduce Senator Ben Cardin, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Senator Cardin was elected to represent Maryland in 2006, and he has been a leader on water infrastructure issues, resiliency, and climate change. All of these things are incredibly relevant when you consider that he represents the beautiful Chesapeake Bay, which is the largest estuary in the United States and which has been the home of innumerable crabs that I have eaten during the course of my life. Senator Cardin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, Jessica, thanks for the promo for the state of Maryland and the Chesapeake Bay. We appreciate that very much, but you're absolutely right. It's the largest estuary in our hemisphere, and it's a precious to our way of life and to our economy, and transportation is critically important to our economy as well. So we need a win-win. We need to improve our transportation, but be respectful of our environment.
Yeah, and I'll be asking about freight, obviously, because that's the subject of the day, but you really can't talk about climate without talking about freight. I mean, we are talking at such a turbulent time for transportation and infrastructure, Senator. We're due for a new highway bill. You guys just extended the current one for a year. Virtually every mode of transportation has been pummeled by the impact of the global pandemic. I know airlines just recently have furloughed tens of thousands of workers. And we really don't know what the future of travel is itself. I mean, I'm talking to you from my home. So, and you know, I am not unusual here. Most people are working from home, and a lot of these well-established patterns of transportation have been completely upended. So, and then we've got the issue of climate change, if that's not enough. So we're watching fires in the West, nearly weekly hurricanes in the South, and just here locally in DC, 100-year floods that seem to occur every few months. I'd like to start a little bit by talking about climate change. I'd like to talk about how you've seen that play out in your own state's infrastructure, particularly the Port of Baltimore and Chesapeake Bay. How has climate change impacted the movement of freight in this country, and how do you see it playing out in Maryland?
There's no question that climate change has had a dramatic impact on our infrastructure. That's why in the Environment and Public Works Committee, as we are reauthorizing the surface transportation, we put a climate section in there. We also dealt with resiliency because we recognize that on the WRDA bill, the water bill, we also dealt with resiliency. Sometimes we may not mention the word climate because of the partisan politics of it, but we recognize we need to deal with adaptation, we need to deal with resiliency. So the frequency of the storms have had major impact on our infrastructure. You see the wildfires out west. We know that the rising sea levels have had an impact on our infrastructure in our ports. So yes, we very much need to be attentive to it. We need to do that not just because of the direct impact on our environment, it's also the impact on our economy. So dealing with climate can help us with resiliency, but also can help us be more competitive globally.
You mentioned the highway bill that the Senate passed last year, which was huge because it had the first ever climate change title. The House bill is very, very different. You could argue that it is first and foremost focused on climate change. Obviously, you voted for the former. You didn't get a chance to vote for the latter. But I'm curious as to your thoughts on the House bill. And given that Congress has just approved that 1-year extension, I'm wondering what elements of both bills you see being potentially compromisable. I mean, where do you see both sides kind of getting what they want with this bill?
Well, I'm very optimistic that we can get a transportation or infrastructure bill passed. The vote in the Environment and Public Works Committee was unanimous. Everyone voted for it. So infrastructure brings us together. Same thing with the Water Resources Development Act, the WRDA Act. It brings us together. The House bill contained issues beyond just the traditional issues that are included in an infrastructure bill. I strongly support the House bill, but I could understand where there would need to be some compromise in order to get a bill to the finish line. I think it will not be difficult to agree on a bill. Now, the current surface transportation, the FAST Act, expired at the end of September. Now, we've continued it under the continuing resolution, but we need to pass a long-term reauthorization of surface transportation, and we need to pass a Water Resources Development Act in this Congress. I hope we can get them both done by the end of the year. If not, we will use continuing resolutions where we need to, and hopefully early next year we'll be able to pass a long-term reauthorization. I say that's critically important because the predictability of at least a 5-year reauthorization. Transportation projects take more than 1 year or more than a few months to get done, and we need the predictability of a long-term reauthorization.
That was kind of the concern last time with the FAST Act. I mean, I can't remember, but it felt like dozens of times that it was reauthorized temporarily. And I'm wondering to what degree that's a concern that you're just going to keep passing, you know?
Oh, it's a major concern when you're trying to do major transportation programs. For example, we got an infra grant to deal with the Howard Street Tunnel, which is part of our rail system, dealing with freight. That's a major long-term project to replace that tunnel so we can do double stacking through Baltimore on the East Coast line of CSX. So all that it can't be done on a continuing resolution. You need to have a long-term commitment in order to get that done. We're making major improvements on a lot of our transportation issues and our transit issues. We can't do that. We have the Purple Line in Montgomery County and the Washington suburbs that require a longer term commitment on a Surface Transportation Act in order to get that done. And it really is critically important, not only for our freight, but for our entire economy.
You mentioned the resiliency piece. That seems to be sort of kind of the safe space for Republicans in terms of climate change. And I'm kind of wondering, you know, to what degree is that shift in focus kind of help to move the, I mean, ASCE talks about, adaptation and mitigation, and resilient infrastructure is part of that. But to what degree do you have to get the other piece, the piece where you're actually reducing emissions as part of it?
Oh, we need both. But when you're dealing with an infrastructure bill itself, you can deal with mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. For example, in the bill that passed our committee, we have a major provision on providing facilities for electric vehicles so that you can use electric vehicles in interstate commerce. That will significantly reduce the amount of greenhouse gases. Transportation is the leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions. So to the extent that we can make it more efficient, we are reducing greenhouse gases. We are dealing with the climate issue itself. In dealing with adaptation, Democrats and Republicans, the business community fully understands the cost of not dealing with adaptation. When we see the amount of damage to our infrastructure, which takes resources away in repairing where we need to advance more modern infrastructure in our country. So we have everyone's attention on dealing with the effects of climate change. As I said earlier, we may not always call it climate change because of the politics and some of the partisan politics. But we have the business community's attention, we have the environmentalist attention, we have the business competitiveness globally needs to deal with this. So we will deal with the effects of climate in the next transportation reauthorization, as well as in the water reauthorization.
Well, I'm definitely going to talk to you about the water reauthorization too, but let me talk a little bit first about the coronavirus and its impact on freight. You know, early on, we saw vast shortages in grocery stores and medical supplies, flaws in the supply chain. I mean, we saw you couldn't get paper towels or hand soap for a while. So to your mind, what did the pandemic do to expose flaws in the supply chain? And is there a way, I mean, is this something that Congress can address legislatively? Is there a way to make improvements now that we've seen these flaws?
Well, clearly COVID-19 has pointed out a real security issue for America on supply chain issues. The immediate concerns were the supply chain for protective equipment, the supplies on medical for testing. That was the immediate concern as to whether we could protect the people of this country from the virus, and whether we had the ability to do the necessary testing because of the dependency of supplies outside of the United States. But as you pointed out, we then recognized pretty early that we had challenges on supplies, on getting materials to the marketplace. We had the safety of those who were part of the supply chain, as well as having the materials necessary to meet those needs. Yes, Congress can do something about this. That's why we have the Defense Production Act to make sure that we have the domestic capacity to deal with what is needed in this country to keep America secure and safe. We need to utilize that more aggressively than it's been done under this administration. We also need to develop domestically the capacity to deal with pandemics or any type of an emergency. We had those plans in place. The Trump administration dismantled the protection we had under the National Security Council to deal with a pandemic. We got to reconfigure that so that we can deal with any emergency in this country and be self-sufficient to take care of the needs of the people of America.
What was the impact on the Port of Baltimore? I'm curious because we heard a lot about trucks, but we didn't hear as much. I mean, there's such an important part of freight is ports, and I'm curious as to whether or not they saw similar issues. It was just not as, it did not get the attention that, you know, truck freight did.
Yes, and we have, our federal delegation has been in contact with the Port of Baltimore, and we have a new administrator, and we've been in conversations. The revenues have been pretty dramatically impacted, as all ports have, and that's just the amount of commerce has been significantly reduced because of the economic downturn. We have protected the Port of Baltimore in regards to the direct impact of COVID-19. And it's interesting, some of the discussions we've talked about, I am proud that the Port of Baltimore just received a $10 million build grant to deal with resiliency at the Dundalk Marine Terminal. So we are making those preparations. Prior to COVID-19, the Port of Baltimore was prepared for the larger cargo vessels as a result of the Panama Canal expansion. So the Port of Baltimore was in very good shape. We're now doing some additional improvements in the Port of Baltimore so that we can bring in even more vessels. So I think the Port of Baltimore is in better shape than most ports in coming out of COVID-19, but make no mistake about it, every port in this country has been adversely impacted by the virus.
Are you concerned about supply chain interruptions going forward? I mean, we've got the holidays approaching, and that's always a big freight time. And I'm curious as to what we're going to see in the future. The pandemic hasn't gone away.
Well, I am confident that the ingenuity in this country will deal with this crisis, and we'll figure out ways. And as we look today, we see that we have caught up to where we needed to be. We were behind in the beginning. We should have been better prepared. As I pointed out earlier, I think what the Trump administration did was wrong. They should have used the Defense Production Act more aggressively, and they certainly should have been better prepared to deal with this crisis. But I am confident that American ingenuity will make sure that we have adequate supplies, but we just can't take that for granted at the governmental level. We need to make sure that we have the policies in place that make that easier to protect this country. Recognize at times the economics of it may require the government to provide assistance so that we have that reliable supply chain here in America.
I want to talk about sort of the long-term impact of how we get around. I mean, you know, as you have to kind of do a little bit of a prediction when you're writing a highway bill. Like, this is the needs that we will have in the future. And those needs have really changed dramatically. I mean, people have changed the way they commute. Transit was something that Democrats had emphasized quite a bit, but right now there's still a considerable slowdown. So I guess I wonder what kind of long-term impact you think that the pandemic is going to have on how we get around, and like, what does transportation look like when we get out of this? This is your chance to be like Nostradamus.
Yeah, well, Jessica, thanks for that question, because it's a very interesting question. You know, I commute to work from Baltimore to Washington. I live in Baltimore and I commute. And that commute time by car can take anywhere pre-COVID from, I guess, an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours and 15 minutes in each direction. Since COVID-19, I've been able to do that in under an hour in each direction because of so much less traffic being on the roads. And I must tell you, our environment has also benefited pretty dramatically from COVID-19 in regards to less use of transportation vehicles that have added to our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, that's one of the positive impacts that we've seen in recent months. What will happen post-COVID-19? Well, one of the things that concern me as we look at our transit systems, they have had a tremendous hit of revenue as a result of COVID-19. As I said, all the transportation modes had. We have to make sure coming out of COVID-19 that we have a robust transit system in place, because it's more economical for people getting to and from places to use transit, as well as it's better for our environment. So one of the planning procedures is to make sure we don't give up on mass transit. We need to continue to invest in mass transit. We also, as we point out, recognize that the volumes will increase again on our roads. We have to make sure that we have the bridge replacements that are necessary. In Maryland, we have several very old bridges that need to be replaced, and we're working to make sure that is done, because it's important for safety, but it's also important for commerce. Both need to have a modern infrastructure. We need faster ways for people to be able to get around. That's why some of the high-speed alternatives on mass transit need to be invested in order to bring people a safer and quicker option to get to and from places in a more environmentally friendly way that's better for the issues we've already talked about. So coming out of COVID-19, we need to recognize that we've lost a lot of jobs. Some of those jobs are not going to come back. Investing in green transportation alternative programs will not only help our environment and help deal with the problems of resiliency and climate change, it will also create good jobs that are necessary in our economy. So that's where I hope we will be coming out of COVID-19.
What do you anticipate that it will take to get people using airplanes and transit again? I mean, when do you think the public's going to be reassured that these are safe?
Well, I think there's going to be an age difference here. I think younger people are already starting to use the airplanes, the planes, and are doing things that are look to be too high of a risk for people who are vulnerable today. So I think until we have a vaccine that is widely been utilized, that's safe and it's effective, until we have widely available therapeutic drugs, we see that the president's had access to a significant amount of therapeutics. Once that's available to the general public, so that if you do get sick, your chances of recovering are much greater than they are today for people who are vulnerable. I think it's going to be difficult to restore the confidence to widely use the air service, or to widely use transit service, or to widely use those forms of transportation that require close contact. Even though we can make it safer, I think the public's not going to embrace those modes of transportation until they feel that they are protected either through a vaccine or therapeutic drugs.
At the same time, we've got an aid package that seems to be completely stalled right now. The airlines have begun furloughing people. I mean, what's the outlook in terms of getting something else passed for not just airlines? I mean, the most recent House bill had something for Amtrak and for transit as well. Do you see any sort of path forward, or do you just feel like it's stalled?
Jessica, I'm so disappointed we haven't passed it already. We should have passed this months ago. The House passed their bill in mid-May. So we're now, close to 5 months past the time when the House has acted. We really are desperate here. We need the money for those who are unemployed, their unemployment benefits. Taxpayers need that extra check in order to have confidence to go out and participate in our economy. We need it for schools to reopen in a safe manner, whether it's a hybrid system and in class or virtual. They need those resources. State and local governments are laying off workers because their revenues are down, and they need help. Bipartisan plea by our governors has gone unanswered. Small businesses, which I am directly involved with Marco Rubio, the Republican chair. The two of us, I think, can come to an agreement, but we need a bill in order to put it into to help small businesses. Our original CARES Act PPP program was for 8 weeks. This pandemic has gone much longer than anyone has anticipated. We need to help the businesses in our community. Homeowners and renters are in danger of losing their homes or their properties. We need to provide help so that they can not only avoid foreclosure, but have the resources in order to be able to pay their rents and mortgages, so that the financial institutions and the landlords have the money that they need in order to pay their obligations. It's really a chain reaction here. And yes, we do need to make sure the transit systems can continue to operate. We need to provide funds there. We need to provide money to make sure this election goes along safely and securely in November. All those issues, United States Postal Service is in desperate need of resources. The CARES Act worked. Mid-March, in March, we passed that. Democrats and Republicans came together. We need to come together, Democrats and Republicans, and pass this HEROES Act immediately. We can't wait till the election. And I applaud Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer for being willing to compromise. It's time for Mitch McConnell to come to the table, and let's get this done now before the election. If we wait till after the election, there'll be thousands of small businesses that'll be shuttered forever that we could have saved. There's going to be many, many people that have become homeless. Our schools are not going to be operating the way they should. Our economy is not going to be back where it needs to be. And yes, we endanger our infrastructure for transportation and commerce because they desperately need the help that's included in the next round of COVID relief.
Let's talk about something that Congress seems to agree on, but has not sealed the deal on. WRDA seems, I mean, I've covered the markups. It seemed kind of like a love fest. It was very refreshing. Do you feel like the conference is going to, do you feel like conference, can you break some news here?
Right, certainly.
Is this lame duck stuff, or is this, I mean, are we going to see this before you guys, when do we see a WRDA?
Well, you're right. WRDA was a love fest. We had that unanimously, and I think just about every senator has important projects that are in the WRDA bill to help their state and their communities. There's some, I would say, secondary issues that are still outstanding. The role for the Army Corps in certain projects, there's some differences there. There's some individual senators that are still trying to negotiate some additional provisions. And we are very close to an election. I don't know whether that acts as a positive or a negative right now. So we're not in session. We don't anticipate to be in session other than to vote on a COVID-related package or the Supreme Court nominee. So I think it's unlikely we will get to a WRDA bill or an infrastructure bill, for that matter, until the lame duck session.
Do you think it will be lame duck, or will it be pushed to next year?
No, I think we could get it done.
I kind of say the question is like I wanted to.
Right. It's the same thing with COVID. You know, there's a good chance we could get both of them done in a lame duck session. But let me tell you something. Once the realities of November the 3rd click in, when people realize what has happened, it can harden some positions and say, gee, aren't we going to be better off handling this next year? So it could change the dynamics in a way that's hard to predict. That's why we say lame duck sessions are always difficult to predict. But I think there's clearly the support in the United States Senate to pass both a COVID bill and a WRDA bill. And I must tell you, I think there's also could be support for for a surface transportation bill. I say that because I've had lots of conversations with Republican colleagues in the Senate, and I know there's significant support for COVID-related legislation, for transportation-related legislation, and certainly for the Water Resources Development Act.
With water resources, you said is mostly secondary stuff. I know one of the big issues in the House side was the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Is that something that you're on board with? Like, let's free up that funding and get it out so people can actually use it?
That issue is not a secondary issue. That's certainly an important primary issue. And yes, we would love to see that money get out there. As you know, it's been used for bookkeeping and not getting out to do what we intended it to do. And yes, we would like to see that money utilized.
Are there other issues with WRDA that you think should sort of necessitate it getting done sooner rather than later?
There are other issues. As you point out, our conference works in a strange way. We don't have a formal conference. It works through our committee leadership, which includes Senator Capito, who's the chair of the subcommittee, and myself as ranking member, and certainly Senator Brasso and Carper. And I can tell you the four of us are very much interested in trying to resolve these last issues. But some of them have been stubborn and they're not primary issues. So we have a few issues we have to resolve. We hope we can take care of that. We also have the issue of whether we deal with clean water and how we deal with clean water. So there's some other issues as to whether we have one bill or two bills, whether you have a trailer bill. There's different jurisdictions in the House than there is in the Senate. Those issues make it a little bit more complicated to get to the finish line.
Senator, this has been such a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you so much. I know it's been a very, very crazy few weeks. So the fact that you were able to sit down, I have a lot of gratitude for. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for covering these subjects. These are important subjects. They don't always get the attention that they need because of the other issues being in the headlines. So thank you very much for covering this, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you to Senator Cardin for participating in today's event. Closing out our newsmaker sessions will be Congressman Sam Graves. Congressman Graves represents Missouri's 6th Congressional District and is the ranking member of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. CQ Roll Call's Jessica Werman returns to interview the Congressman. Jessica's interview will begin shortly.
Hi, I'm Jessica Werman, and I cover transportation and infrastructure for CQ Roll Call. And I'm here today with Congressman Sam Graves, who is the ranking Republican on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Sam Graves is a natural fit for a senior position on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He basically grew up on the airfield that sits in the middle of his family farm. That airport, the Gould-Peterson Municipal Airport, is named after Graves' uncle, a B-24 pilot who was killed in World War II. Graves himself is an accomplished pilot with, now correct me if I'm undercounting this, more than 3,000 hours of flight time. Where are we at now?
It's about 4,500.
Okay, so yeah, I undershot that by a little bit. We'll round up. He represents the 6th Congressional District of Missouri, a state that is an epicenter for so many modes of travel. For example, the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers are in your state, and his district covers more square miles than 9 US states. So transportation is kind of a big deal for his constituents. So he's brought his expertise in aviation and other modes to the committee. And we are so glad that he is here to bring us that expertise today. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it because you are joining us at an incredibly crazy time. So we're talking at a time when we've got a pandemic, an election, and on a wonkier level, a surface transportation bill. Let's talk first about the latter. So Congress just has passed a 1-year extension of the FAST Act because the bill that House Democrats passed this year and the bill that the Senate EPW committee passed last year were completely different. You've made it clear that of the two, you kind of preferred the Senate bill, and you've criticized the House Democratic bill as kind of a Green New Deal sort of initiative that was doomed to fail. You also presented your own plan, which was very different from what the House Democrats passed. Will you start by setting the scene for next year? I mean, do you think that a long-term bill is achievable? Where do you see as areas of compromise? And are we going to keep seeing extensions? I remember the last time, right before the FAST Act, there were like dozens of extensions. Are we going to see that again?
Well, hopefully we don't, because it really hurts state DOTs when it comes to the planning process and trying to figure out what projects they can move forward with, what projects they can complete. And particularly when you get into the construction season, that was one of the reasons why we were pushing so hard for a year-long extension, so that we don't get into to that routine. And I think both sides would agree that, you know, it's just not healthy for state DOTs when it comes to planning. So that gives us kind of a restart, I guess, and obviously a lot depends on what happens in the election. But it gives us some time to work on a new bill and come up with something that's bipartisan, which I think, you know, nothing will pass if it isn't a bipartisan bill, and that's always been the tradition of the committee right up until this last one. And so hopefully we'll see, you know, this restart be much more productive.
What are your do or dies for this new highway bill? I mean, and are there areas where you can, from the bill that the House Democrats passed, that where you think this is something that we can work with? I mean, what are the things that you really need to see in a long-term extension?
Well, I don't have any do or dies. I mean, I'm open to anything, and I told Peter, you know, when we started working on this, that you know, don't just assume that that I'm, or you know, my conference is going to be against everything. You know, give us the opportunity to talk about it. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in this last bill, but you know, we did introduce our own. We have several things we would like to see in a bill. You know, I want a new highway bill to focus on those core principles, you know, and the main thing being roads and bridges. You know, obviously cutting government red tape and speeding up the process of, you know, getting projects done, giving states more flexibility when it comes to being able to determine, you know, what those projects are. We also need to make sure rural infrastructure is taken care of, and we need to make sure that technology is considered as we move forward with transportation. And then, of course, there's making sure that the Highway Trust Fund is, you know, viable for the foreseeable future. And right now, we obviously have a situation where it's not. You know, it's declining. Revenues are declining. We have more vehicles on the road that are more efficient. We have more vehicles on the road that don't even, you know, buy gas. So those are some of the things that we would like to see in a highway bill.
You know, the bill that the Democrats introduced was very, very green. It was a very, your Democratic counterpart, he described it as transformative, and he said, you know, climate change is kind of a non-negotiable for our side. Republicans have not talked as much specifically about climate change, but they have talked a lot about resiliency and resilient infrastructure that can withstand major events. Moving forward, do you see this debate when, you know, as infrastructure relates to climate change? I mean, do you see the focus being on the resiliency piece? It seems to be the one place where both sides are really coming together on this particular issue.
Well, that's what I think. Yeah, and that's what I think we need to focus on, because regardless of climate change, you know, you're still going to have, you know, major weather events, which we have always had, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure is able to withstand those. Climate change, no matter where you're at on the belief of whether or not it's man-made or natural, whatever the case may be, it's not going to end tomorrow. You know, we're still going to have weather events. So I think we need to concentrate on resiliency, and you know, again, we've always said, don't cut us out. Don't just assume, never assume anything. You know, and Garrett Graves on the committee has been working real hard from the standpoint of resiliency and moving forward, and you know, we need to stick with that. We don't have to, you know, it isn't an all or nothing, and as you put it earlier, you know, do or die. You know, we don't have those. We don't look at it that way. Let's talk about it, come up with a compromise, and move forward.
Do you see limiting emissions as something Republicans are open to? I mean, a lot of the, I mean, there was two parts of it, the resiliency part and then kind of limiting emissions on the other end. Is that something that?
There's nothing wrong with limiting emissions, and that's something that, we continue to look at and continues to happen regardless of legislation. Industry is looking to limit that, and then we're seeing more and more vehicles out there that again use alternative fuels, whether that's CNG or propane or electric or whatever the next new technology is going to be, and we need to keep that in mind as we move forward when it comes to obviously funding highway projects moving forward.
So you started talking about the Highway Trust Fund, which that always seems to be coming into this beat. I thought that was sort of the big standoff, really. You have been one of the top advocates of VMT. That's the vehicle miles traveled method for those who are uninitiated. It's basically charging you per miles traveled. There are pilot projects, I think, in Oregon and some other states. But even the groups that advocate for this method say that it's not really ready to be deployed on a national level yet. And I know your bill and the House Democrat bill would create national pilot programs for VMT. So how do we get from here to there? How do you actually make it from something that's a pilot and something that states are experimenting with to something that's adopted on a widespread basis? I know there is some skepticism about the privacy. I mean, how do you actually make this a reality?
Well, there's a couple of misconceptions that are there. The first one is that we're not ready for that to deploy, which is absolutely ridiculous. We can deploy it immediately, and for people that are already that are buying gas, that we still have the majority of our vehicle fleet is buying either diesel or gas. We just do it at the pump exactly the way we're doing now, and that is you just have a formula at the pump, figure out what the national miles per gallon are, and you multiply that times the VMT, whatever we set that at, and it's just calculated into into your fuel price at the pump, and is collected at the pump exactly the way it is now. And the other misconception is that privacy issue. We're not talking about tracking or GPS devices or anything like that. We're just going to do it at the pump exactly the way we are doing it now. The only difference will be is right now it's just a simple tax that's added on to the price of fuel, and the other way is it's just a simple formula that is again added on to the price of the fuel. And so I also think it's important too that we don't layer a new tax on top of the existing tax. We got to end one on date certain, and we start the new one on date certain. I don't want to see individuals and families burdened with a new tax layered on top of. And I also want to keep it revenue neutral, at least for the time being, and so that people don't see a change. And in fact, if you're buying gas, you're not going to see any change whatsoever. You're not even going to notice it.
So could you walk me through how that works? I pull up, with my little Civic or whatever, and then I mean, it's just basically based on a formula that it would be added to the pump, right?
You just come up with whatever the national average is going to be for miles per gallon. Mm-hmm. Let's say it's 15 miles to the gallon, and and then that's multiplied by whatever the VMT might be. Let's say it's a penny, and so it's just factored in at the pump price. When your total comes up just exactly the way it is now, and it's collected exactly the same way. So there doesn't have to be any new technology.
How does that work for electric vehicles?
Well, electric's going to be the only, and you can deploy that pretty easily too when it comes to all other alternative fuels except electric. That's the hardest part, is how do you, and no matter what you look at when it comes to electric, you can't figure out how to charge based on the amount of electricity you're drawing, for charging. So we're going to have to go through it. And the way most of the pilot projects have worked is people that own electric vehicles will probably just pay the difference whenever they do their registration each year. What is the difference in your odometer reading last year compared to this year? And something as simple as that, and they're just going to pay it that way, or they can do it quarterly or whatever the case may be.
Let's spend a little bit of time on talking about the pandemic. We are talking at a time when the House Democratic leadership and the administration are working on a deal regarding extension of the payroll support program for airlines. And, we just got news today that American Airlines, that United Airlines are beginning to furlough employees because the CARES Act, which was passed in March, their payroll support program is expiring. So this aid is very much supported by airlines and labor unions, but some economists have said this can't be infinite. We can't keep, re-upping and re-upping. And at some point, we're going to have to stop holding up the industry. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on this, and what's the balance between keeping an industry that's hurt by no fault of its own alive versus making sure taxpayer dollars are spent responsibly? Where's the sweet spot for the government on that?
Well, we can't let the airline industry collapse. If it does, our economy is going to collapse with it, and we are going to have to prop it up. And again, it's, as you mentioned, it's not due to any bad business decision or decision made by corporate. This is as a result of the government. That's what's put them in this position. So I absolutely think we need to push that or plus it up through April. And ultimately, though, it isn't about continuing to prop up the industry. We're going to have to get the country moving again. We're going to have to open the country back up. And that's exactly right. It isn't indefinite. And I don't think we should continue to have to prop up the industry indefinitely. We need to get the country open. That's the answer. Open the country back up and get air travel moving again. It's a vitally important part of our economy and just the movement of people, goods and services all over the country, and it needs to be going again. The economy has to be opened up. We can't, it isn't just the airlines. It's every small business or big business that's out there as well. Job creators, depending on what sector you're in, some are actually flourishing as a result of the pandemic and some of the way people are doing business now, but some are just struggling and literally, hanging on by their fingernails to try to stay alive.
What do you think it's going to take to get people flying again?
Well, the biggest thing is just, opening it up. You look at, not come out here and go home every single week. Mm-hmm. And you have, and I usually fly Southwest Airlines because they, have the best options for me. And right now, they're leaving all of their middle seats open, and that's kind of a requirement. And many times the plane is full except for those middle seats. And so it would certainly help out considerably if we could open those up. And I don't know if that even has that much impact. It's just hard to tell at this point, but sooner or later, we're going to have to do something. The pandemic isn't going away. It's not going away. We're going to live with this just like we do the flu. And, we need to consider that. We just can't keep the economy shut down forever because we're spending money we don't have. That's the bottom line. We're spending money that we don't have from the federal government. And, we've got to turn this thing around.
So the payroll support program that I'm asking you about, passenger airlines took the bulk of it. They took $25 billion. And this is a more freight related question because we are here, talking about freight today. The cargo airlines only spent a fraction of the $4 billion that was allocated for them in the payroll support program. And in fact, in some of the bills that exist to renew that, it's a lot less that's allocated for cargo airlines. Why is that? Why didn't they wind up using it to the same degree payroll support that the passenger airlines did?
Well, passenger airlines or passenger transportation from the airlines, fell to significant lows, and are to almost zero there at one point in time. But what's interesting is their cargo actually increased. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of people were staying at home and they were shopping at home. I think a lot of people didn't want to go out. And so they were doing their shopping at home, and it shows up at your doorstep and it's easy. And so that all means air cargo, because so much of that is moved around the country, through air cargo, and then it gets on a truck and then it makes its way to your house. But it's and prior to that, some of those goods are brought in obviously in the United States through, shipping or whatever the case may be. But that's kind of the new norm, and it increased. So a lot of the brick and mortar businesses that people used to go out and visit all the time, folks just quit. They just stayed at home, and so air cargo flourished. And that's a little bit of a maybe an over or an exaggerated view, but they are doing very well, as compared to passenger airlines. So it's just kind of the new norm.
So we've all heard about the supply chain issues that were highlighted by the pandemic. What long-term lessons do we draw from the initial disruptions? And I mean, we all remember when you couldn't get toilet paper for months, or paper towels, soap, that was a big thing. So, I mean, are there long-term lessons, and is there a way Congress can weigh in to sort of make sure that the supply chain isn't disrupted if, God forbid, we have a future event like this again?
Yeah, and all those individuals were essential workers, and that supply chain was, is vital. And we found out, maybe even that it may be more vital than we ever thought before. But that's, just like everything else. If you don't have a good supply chain, you're not going to be able to get those goods, services, food, whatever the case may be, to the individuals out there that need it. So we have to do everything we can to maintain that steady flow and that supply chain to make sure it's safe and accessible. And I think, we learned some vulnerabilities from that, and we're correcting that. We're going through the process of correcting it, but we want to make sure that we are not vulnerable, and that isn't, the weak link in that process.
What would be, I mean, how is there a role for Congress in this, or is this something where sort of the market takes care of itself?
Well, market will take care of itself a lot, but Congress's role is to get out of the way, to be quite honest with you, and not hamper it, any more than any more than it should. And that's the biggest thing, is Congress needs to get out of the way and make sure that, that we don't, stifle that chain of transportation.
What permanent changes do you think we'll see in how we move goods and people? I mean, I am talking to you, I'm talking to you over a screen, whereas in the good old days, we would have been talking in person. I'm wondering if we have a future where we're just going to see a lot more telecommuting. And I guess I'm wondering, how do those changes influence public policy related to transportation? I mean, you were talking about a highway bill, but we don't really know what the demand for highways is going to be coming out of this. It's very hard to plan when things are so uncertain. So, I mean, what do you see the future as in terms of?
I think we'll ultimately get back to more normal, or what we considered normal before this. I do think there will be more telecommuting, but I also think that people by and large, and I hear this when I move around my district and get out there, they're tired of being inside. They're tired of, not being able to be social, and they're wanting to see that more normal atmosphere, at least the normal before this. So I think most of it's going to come back. I think we will get back to an equilibrium, and I think there will be some more telecommuting. I think there will be more working at home, but I would venture to say, we're going to get back to 80% of where we were before, and I think it's going to happen fairly rapidly too, particularly when we get a vaccine and people are feeling a little bit safer about being social.
Okay, wonderful. So, talking a little bit about, Congress has handled everything from transit to airlines, Amtrak in sort of its pandemic response. The truckers groups have not really asked for, any sort of specific relief, but what they have talked about is tax relief. Specifically, some organizations representing trucking groups have talked about the need for excise tax relief, but it's not unanimous. There's other groups that say that really only benefits the large operators. I'm wondering how you help out the freight industry. I mean, we have been obviously very reliant on them during this pandemic. So how do we make how do we sort of smooth the way to make their lives a little easier as we depend on them so much during this time?
Well, that's a good question, and there is not a consensus, as you pointed out, within the industry, and I think that's something that we need to wade into, carefully. I do think that, again, government needs to get out of the way, but I think we need to wade into that and see if there is some sort of consensus. But nothing's going to move forward unless there is a consensus. That's something that Congress needs more than anything else, is when you divide an industry and members of Congress tend to stay away from that at any cost, and it's just not something that people necessarily want to wade into. So it's a good question, and everyone's exploring different ideas and different thoughts, but again, that consensus issue is what kind of keeps that, I guess you might say, on the back burner.
It seems the consensus is more on things that will make life easier for truckers in terms of parking and regulations that make it, hours of service.
Hours of service.
On the regulatory side. Am I right in that?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'm hoping you can break some news. What's the update on, this is also freight related, but we're moving modes. We're going from the road, from freight on the highway to freight via water. What is the conference update on WRDA? Are we going to see it pass this year? If so, when?
I think we'll see it pass this year. We had a good bipartisan bill came out of the House and out of House committee. We're waiting on the Senate, but it was a good bill. It was a good process, and it's kind of greased. We are pre-conferencing some of the items, which helps grease that process. So if I were guessing today, I think it'll happen in that November, December timeframe. I think we'll have it done for the end of the year.
Are there big points of contention that still need to be hammered out, or is
There's really not. I mean, we got so much of the stuff out of the way, and I'm specifically speaking to the House bill, but I don't see any real big points of contention at all.
Are you like similarly, I mean, your Democratic colleague, Pete DeFazio, is like, he has a super big bee in his bonnet about the whole Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, making sure it's deployed for its intended purposes. Is this something that's a similar, like, burr in your saddle? Is this something that you equally are irritated about?
I feel the same way about it. It does need to be used as intended. And, Pete and I are in complete agreement on that. And it's something that needs to happen. And it's been a frustration with both of us for some time. And as you pointed out, that bee in the saddle. But,
we mixed metaphors there. I like that. Yeah, I was wondering if you were as passionate about that issue, because he really gets fired up about that as he does a couple of other topics. So, okay, let's talk air really quickly as well, because it seems like we're kind of, we're running out of a little bit of time. So I watched the committee by voice vote last month approve its Boeing bill. This is the first major legislative reaction to the 2 Boeing 737 MAX crashes. When do you see that bill going to the House floor? It was overly bipartisan. It was like overwhelmingly bipartisan. Basically, everyone seemed to be very much in agreement about it. But when do you see it going to the floor? And is this a first step, or is this kind of a last step? I mean, where is this in terms of the process of making sure this doesn't happen again, or it's made as preventable as humanly possible?
Well, it's hard to, it's hard to make disasters preventable unless you have, qualified individuals in the cockpit that are capable of handling, an emergency. So we can try to provide guidelines. And the United States is the gold standard when it comes to safety and when it comes to training and everything. And we can provide guidelines, but we can't have any influence on foreign carriers, or foreign nations and what their attitudes are or their qualifications are. And, it would be nice to be able to wave a magic wand and say this is never going to happen again, but that's obviously something that you can't say. This is a process. And, we did pass a pretty decent bill out. We negotiated a good bill, and that's how you move legislation forward, is when you negotiate and then you ultimately come up, it's give and take, you ultimately come up with a bill that everyone or most parties can support. And so we'll move forward with that. It's hard to tell what the timeline is going to be. I mean, obviously that's up to the speaker. And I know Peter's pushing her pretty hard to try to get it up. It's possible we could have it in November. You know, it's possible that the Senate could pick up the House version. The Senate dropped their process back in September, and now that the House has moved a bill that did pass bipartisan, I think it's possible they could pick it up, and you know, we could see this implemented as soon as, you know, the end of this year as well. So.
You're beginning to make me think that the lame duck period is not going to be very lame for me in my beat.
Well, it all depends on the election, you know, and
Yeah.
there's various scenarios that can play out in all of this, and so now we're in that wait and see mentality, and we obviously will finish up tomorrow probably, and you know, or later tonight, and you know, and then we'll see what happens in the election.
So one final question. We are in this incredibly transformative period for transportation. This is a big question. This is my sort of big picture question, I guess. So, I mean, it's an amazing time for transportation. And that's kind of even before the pandemic. I mean, we've got drones that are increasingly being thought of as the next big thing for package delivery and freight. We've got automakers and probably, you know, moving on to truck freight, who are increasingly relying on self-driving technology. What predictions do you have for the future and how we move goods? I mean, what do you see? I'm kind of asking you to sort of play the role of like fortune teller here, but what do you see moving forward as we kind of go through this transformative time? And, you know, obviously we've got the pandemic, so that's really kind of changed a lot of, you know.
It has, and that's actually driving some of it too, is the pandemic and people wanting to, in some cases, distance themselves from individuals. It's just like deliveries, that sort of thing. But technology it's fascinating, some of the things being worked on out there and what industry's coming up with, and you know, we're just at the very beginning of you know, some really neat new things that are out there on the horizon, and that's something that we need to be thinking about as we start looking at these transportation bills moving forward. You know, whether that is in WRDA or surface transportation or aviation reauthorization or whatever the case may be, we need to be thinking about these things and what needs to be incorporated as we either build or repair or maintain, you know, the systems out there. You know, and that's the hard part, is thinking outside the box in terms of what needs to take place to foster this growth in technology and not stifle it. And that's what I worry about more than anything else with government. Government tends to stifle more than it fosters. And so, you know, that's the thing that worries me a little bit about technology, but it's pretty neat, some of the stuff.
Wonderful. Well, you have been so gracious with your time. I really appreciate it. And it's always such a pleasure to talk with you. So thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully the next one of these interviews we can do face to face.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jessica and Congressman Graves. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has created challenges for freight networks, forcing leaders within the supply chain to rethink procurement, delivery strategies, and how to work through a volatile market environment. In our next segment, Seth Clevenger, Transport Topics Managing Editor for Features, will be discussing the future of freight, global supply chain, and risk mitigation with two freight industry heavyweights, Chad England, the CEO of CR England, and Drew Wilkerson, who heads the North American Transportation Group for XPO. And now I'll turn the program over to Seth.
Hello and welcome. I'm Seth Clevenger, Managing Editor of Features at Transport Topics, and it's great to be with you, remotely at least, to moderate our first panel discussion at this virtual symposium co-hosted by CQ Roll Call and Transport Topics. In this session, we're going to discuss the future of freight, the global supply chain, and risk mitigation. The coronavirus pandemic has placed significant strain on many freight networks, forcing shippers, carriers, and third-party logistics providers to adapt to new challenges and volatile market conditions. To ensure that essential freight continues to reach its destination, supply chain leaders have been taking a fresh look at procurement, inventory management, and final mile delivery strategies as they respond to the current crisis and prepare for future disruptions. To help us learn more about these important trends, I'm excited to welcome two industry leaders. First, I'd like to introduce Chad England, CEO of CR England, a major truckload carrier and logistics provider with annual revenue of more than $1.5 billion. Also joining us is Drew Wilkerson, president of XPO Logistics Transportation Group in North America. XPO, of course, is one of the industry's largest providers of freight brokerage, warehousing, and less than truckload and final mile transportation. So I'd like to begin the conversation by discussing how transportation companies responded to the disruption caused by this COVID-19 pandemic, which of course has just tested the flexibility of freight networks across North America and really the world. So I'll start with you, Drew. Could you just give us an overview of how XPO adjusted its operations and how the company contributed to the country's response to this outbreak?
Seth, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversations today. It's exciting to be a part of the panel. At XPO, we're always managing our risk. We've always known our employees were essential workers, but we saw it more through COVID-19, and our team stepped up to the plate. I've never been more proud to be a part of XPO than what I was through the COVID-19 pandemic. The first thing we had to focus on was safety. We focused on social distancing, wearing masks, deep cleaning. We went well beyond what the CDC required us to do. We were thinking about the health and the mental health of our employees. We offered free testing for our employees. We had access to 24/7 nurses and doctors. Even if our employees had opted out of our health care, we still offered to treat them if they contracted COVID-19. On the contribution side, it's something I'm really proud of. We all saw during the pandemic that New York City was the epicenter, and you saw these hospitals on television, these pop-up hospitals throughout Central Park. All of the equipment that went in there, we were a contributor to that transportation. The beds, the medicine, the masks, the face shields, the ventilators were all part of what we did. One other one that I'd like to highlight is Ford. Ford shifted from making automobiles to making masks, gowns, ventilators, and other PPE gear. We delivered over 1 million ventilators for Ford, and we were their primary partner for getting essential goods across the country. I'm proud of the team and what they accomplished, and I know that the work that we did saved lives across the country.
Well, there's no doubt that really this whole event has raised the profile of the transportation industry, and we of course within the industry know how essential this work is every day. But I think that society at large has seen it during a time like this. And Chad, I'd like to ask you the same question. Just take us through. How did CR England adjust to all the challenges that were caused by this pandemic, and how did your company participate in the response?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to participate in this panel, and thanks, Seth, and to Transport Topics for including me in this. And, honestly, it was a lot like what Drew said for us. I'd like to think we got started pretty early. We really started worrying about the safety of our employees, and that was the first thing. And so we actually, one of the first companies, our headquarters is in Salt Lake City. We were one of the first companies that I know of that started to work from home, that started to take some precautions with masks, and we really jumped on it quickly. But the very first thing we did was enlist our people. We started talking to our frontliners. We started enlisting them and thanking them in advance for participating. Of course, we're an essential industry. It's an essential function for our country, and it's mission critical that everybody on our team was supporting the great responsibility that we felt like we had to keep this country going. So when things got more serious, it was amazing to me to see how our team stepped up. It was unbelievable, and still is, to see the way that we came together, not apart, as these challenges mounted. We had one particular day in Salt Lake where we had an earthquake. It was actually a major earthquake in the middle of a pandemic. It was right when we were testing our work from home systems, and we had about half of our crew in the office. I happened to be here when this place shook, and it shook hard. And it was so cool to see the way that people supported each other. My brother was standing right next to me, and I'm embarrassed to say I jumped under a desk. He made sure everybody else did. It was pretty awesome to see the support that people had for each other. So we did all the things that everybody's done as far as safety practices and masks and disinfectant and social distancing. We run some truck driving schools, and we made sure that people were separated, and that's a pretty big challenge in this environment. But we made all kinds of adjustments. What kept going was frequent communication with our team, with our customers. We'll get into more of that stuff later, but we wanted to make sure that we were protecting that infrastructure. And so we call our drivers after this our heroes of the road. I'm so thankful for those that felt that responsibility and carried the weight and literally pulled the loads to make sure that the American families had food and supplies during this difficult time.
Well, thank you both for sharing your experiences thus far. Now, of course, we're still dealing with COVID-19. We're not out of the woods yet on this, but I think it's interesting to think about what the future will look like, what the new normal is going to be post-pandemic. So I'd like to ask each of you, just what is this industry going to look like, and how will this crisis just change the way supply chains are built and designed in the long term? Drew, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, Seth, these are conversations we're having with our customers every single day. And what we're hearing from our customers, especially the large retail customers, is they're looking to de-risk in their supply chains as well as the transportation that they're providing across the country. The pandemic has shown them that they're looking for large-scale, financially stable companies that they know are going to be here after the pandemic. And so it's important that you have those things, but it's also important that you're giving them access to massive amounts of capacity. Customers want capacity. They want to be able to deal in multiple modes of transportation, have automation, real estate options, labor pools, and then obviously robust technology is a huge deal for customers as we go forward. 4 things that I would call out that we've heard from customers that they're focused on throughout the pandemic and going forward has been safety, service, fulfillment speed, and transportation visibility. So we've really been focused on helping some of our brick and mortar customers that in the retail sector shift more from omni-channel into the e-commerce growth. And customers, both retail and non-retail, are looking for providers that can flex capacity up and down as the market goes. Obviously on the e-commerce, you've seen the tightening of capacity, so they need somebody who can flex up. But on some of the manufacturing side, you need somebody who can actually scale down, but is still going to guarantee you that capacity and have you a truck and be committed to you long-term and be a long-term partner.
And Chad, I'll ask you the same thing. You got to get your thoughts on, what do you think supply chains are going to look like, long-term after we've gone through all this?
Well, I think the fragility of the modern supply chain has been exposed a little bit. And in some ways, we've seen it's fragile. In other ways, we've seen how resilient it is. The people are resilient. Some of the processes may be a little bit fragile. For example, we hire a lot of drivers. We're a big company, bring in a lot of drivers. And we have seen how it's so much more challenging to train and license new drivers. It can take months to get an appointment for a CDL test in many states. Classroom and group learning is difficult to mix with social distancing. These challenges are creating an unprecedented shortage of new drivers entering the industry. Advertising costs for new or experienced drivers are up dramatically. Because of this, fleets are fighting with each other over drivers and shrinking, and supply is short for shippers. So while some of these pressures will soften over the long term, the driver recruiting and training and licensing and hiring processes, I think, are going to be permanently tighter than in the past. We've all talked about driver shortages for years. I think the real driver shortage is here now and here for a long time. Another way to look at this, I think, is that the pandemic will drive supply chain diversification more than deglobalization. And just like Drew was saying, the capacity that our shippers are relying on, I think, is going to change behavior. I think they'll diversify their networks. I think they'll make a number of changes that will impact this thing. And so, it'll be interesting to see, how much this time frame permanently changes consumer behavior. For example, will people go back to restaurants as often as before? Will they stay at home or consume more food from grocery stores? I think it's one other thing that I think is worth noting is it's becoming more difficult and expensive to provide expedited team service because of the driver challenges. I think the industry will experience reduced team capacity and a significant team cost increase due to the level of risks associated with team driving.
These are all fascinating insights, and of course, both of you are seeing this firsthand and have been for these past several months now. And I want to pick up on one of the points you made, Chad, about resiliency on one hand, but fragility on the other in some ways. And of course, over time, there's been a lot of movement toward just-in-time inventory models. So I'm wondering if we're going to start to see a shift back toward larger stockpiles for certain types of freight, certain product categories as a result of this event. Of course, generally, if you wanted food during the pandemic, you could get food, which is absolutely a credit to all the work that our industry does. But if you wanted toilet paper for a while, you had to wait for a couple weeks unless you were right there when a truck arrived. But I'll start with you, Drew. Do you think that shippers and logistics companies are going to think differently about inventory management in light of COVID-19, and if so, how?
Yeah, so I think that it's a great question, Seth. And we saw the consumer demands really change overnight with COVID, especially if you look at e-commerce. E-commerce we expected massive growth over the next 3 years, but what we expected over the next 3 years, we got in the middle of COVID-19. And so it was definitely an elevation of what we saw there on the e-commerce side. As far as the inventory goes, that is something that obviously you can do in your supply chain, but it's also very costly to do, to have inventory just sitting rows within your warehouse and it's not being used. So that's something that the customers have to weigh, is how much inventory do they want to have that is going out. And what we have to do within that, we have to be flexible and agile in how we're dealing with and helping them solve these tough problems. We've got to be able to leverage our technology. We've got to be able to flex the capacity up and down, as Chad and I both alluded to. But on the technology piece, we're focused on our XPO Connect platform and how can we show them multiple modes of transportation and give them visibility across the supply chain, but also give them industry trends as what's going on within. If you look at the hurricanes that just hit down in Florida and Louisiana and Texas, how can you tell them which routes are being adjusted and what's happening there within your technology? How can you tell your drivers where to buy fuel at and where to eat at for decent prices? Is things that we're focused on within our technology platform.
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think a number of companies and transportation managers have been burned by the issues with resiliency in the supply chain. I just looked at an inventory to sales ratio chart for total business. And what it showed was that, between 2010 and pre-pandemic, the inventories were going up a little bit anyway. After decades of dropping, we're not quite as just in time as we were before. And thank goodness during the pandemic, that's how it played out. But I do think that, that each company is going to have to weigh that balance, right? How much inventory are they going to hold? I do think it will go up a bit, but there's only so much that can be afforded. So we're in the same situation. We're here to make sure that as cycles change, as needs change, we're here to support our customers. And as we make that a huge focus, then we'll do things the right way and be successful.
Got it. Another piece of the conversation that's really kind of gained steam because of this event has been talk about nearshoring of manufacturing. There's some indication, at least, that is happening more. There was a Gartner survey of 260 global supply chain leaders that was conducted back in February and March, so really before the pandemic really took hold. But that survey found that 33% of supply chain leaders had moved sourcing and manufacturing activities out of China or plan to do so in the next two or 3 years. So I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you expect the nearshoring trend to accelerate? And if so, to what extent? And how will that affect freight transportation in North America? Drew, you want to take first crack at that?
Sure. We expect it to accelerate. As you said, the survey was done right before the pandemic. So we do expect it to accelerate from the conversations that we're having with our customers. And, we expect it in the US as well as in Mexico, where you're going to see this. And it's going to create an additional transportation need across it. I think the intermodal market specifically is going to benefit it whenever you start looking at the cross-border transportation that's going to come from this. But for supply chains overall, they're going to, in the US, they're going to look to their vendors and they're going to see how close they can get their vendors, because what's their goal? Their goal is to get the end consumer the product as quickly as possible. So they're going to pull their vendors as closely as possible so that they can get the end consumer the product as quickly as they can.
I agree with that. I also believe that we'll see nearshoring accelerate, and it's because of the market. You think of what it costs to get manufacturing done in Mexico right now compared to China. China the costs have been going up dramatically. Mexico, not as much. And so I think the markets are pushing things that direction. That's great for our business. We're, as far as I know, the largest carrier going back and forth across the border with temperature controlled products. And so we love to see that. And then, of course, balance is a big thing that you got to think of too. The trade balance the U.S. has with Mexico, currently we're at a deficit, and we got to get that right. So, there's about $100 million gap on that with Mexico, and we'd love to see that balanced out because it's healthier for the freight market. But, as one that cares a heck of a lot about I could tell you, Mexico is producing some great things, and America needs to step up our game in the way that we produce. Our manufacturing needs to improve to make let's nearshore to our hometowns. Let's make sure that the manufacturing's happening right here. I'm not worried about what mode it'll go, because ultimately everything essentially gets delivered by truck.
Yeah, can't skip that part of the process. I mean, the vast majority of freight in North America, of course, is delivered by truck. Now, we've already touched on my next question a little bit, but I'd like to go into a little bit more depth. And that's really just kind of looking at the balance of, kind of these competing goals. On one hand, there's the goal of, optimizing freight efficiency, making everything as streamlined as possible. But at the same time, especially in light of this pandemic, there's a clear need for supply chain resilience. And as you know, sometimes those priorities can lead you in different directions. So, how do you find that balance? I'll start with you, Chad, on this one. How do you balance that, again, the need for efficiency and resilience?
You bet. Well, in any business, there are efficiency trade-offs. Like we were discussing earlier, shippers are now forced to consider how to balance just-in-time standards with higher inventories to protect against product shortage risks. In our business, we have a myriad of efficiency trade-offs to consider. As markets cycle, we often have to ask ourselves the question, do we keep our year-round load commitments when there are higher-paying seasonal loads available to us? What kind of relationship do we have with our customers? And if we chase the higher-paying seasonal freight, we may be stuck with nothing later. So it comes down to the strategy that will best help you compete. In our case, that's developing really tight partnerships with our customers. We'll bend over backwards to keep our commitments and gravitate to customers that feel the same way. If there's a proven track record and mutual trust, that creates a consistent, resilient situation and less ups and downs. There are others that thrive by chasing the buck, and maybe I'm not brave enough to go after that strategy, but I'll tell you, I think consistency and trust are values that we stick to and have worked well for us in the past.
And Drew, I'm very curious to hear your perspective on this question at XPO as well. How do you find that proper balance between optimizing efficiency and also ensuring reliability and resilience?
Yeah, what I just heard Chad say, I agree with. It comes down to service and relationship with your customers. And that's something that we're focused on every single day at XPO. We have to be flexible and agile with how we're dealing with them, because it is a unique situation that we've never seen with COVID-19. And for us, we have to look at the multimodal transportation. We've got to look at the final mile segment, the intermodal, dedicated truckload brokerage market, and look at all the different places that we are touching the customer and making sure that the service and the relationships there. We're talking to the customers about their inventory as well as how well they are stocked for the forward going, but we're also helping them maintain the balance, because they, again, I said it earlier, they can't have too much when you go to how much is in their warehouses, because it gets costly for them. And then we're focused on the nearshoring. We think that's a huge opportunity for us in the US and Mexico. Every week, we're looking to help our customers with different ways of shipping transportation. So we're looking at, do you want to hold some shipments back and ship larger LTL shipments? Do you want to ship multi-stop truckloads? There's so many different ways that you can do it and be innovative with your customers. And we've got unique platforms that allow you to help do that, especially within our managed trans product. Recently, we've been able to see where we have still picked up stuff from China, and we're delivering it all the way to the door in the home in the US. And we saw in COVID-19 that gyms shut down. And as gyms shut down, people were ordering fitness equipment to their homes. And so we have seen a massive lift on fitness equipment being picked up in China, and we're handling every single piece of the transportation all the way into the end consumer's home.
And you started to touch on this, Drew, about this acceleration of e-commerce. And of course, that's been happening for many years now, but, this event really seems to be kind of a watershed moment for really accelerating that existing trend. And, just think about all the people who have been, shopping online really out of necessity, rather than making an extra trip to a retail location. And consumers now seem to be increasingly comfortable, ordering, from a broader range of product categories, whether it's groceries for home delivery or maybe curbside pickup, or some of these large and bulky items like that exercise equipment, furniture and large appliances now just ordered online rather than going to a store first. And Drew, XPO has a large final mile business, as you mentioned, and I'm curious to see, to hear what you're seeing. How much of a change in e-commerce patterns have you seen as a result of this pandemic so far?
Seth, we were the first ones to feel the e-commerce growth in our final mile business. We're going into 10 million homes every single year, and we're seeing that tick up this year through the pandemic. And I believe we're in the early innings of the acceleration of what you're seeing on the e-commerce growth. One of the things that our last mile team did is they sent out a survey to the end consumer. So we went to our customers, and we asked them just a few simple questions. But there's 2 points that I'd make off of it. 55% of people are doing do-it-yourself projects at home now. I know whenever I come home every week, it looks like my wife has started a new project or she's ordered something new that's going in the house. And the second piece is 94% of people are more likely to continue to buy online and have it shipped to their home post-pandemic versus what they were pre-pandemic. The consumers want speed and availability. I've talked about XPO Connect, our platform, a couple of times. Within last mile, one of the things that we've done is contactless delivery. So we create e-signatures where you can actually social distance or even curbside delivery for the customer, and you don't have to see them. You deliver everything they need to the device to where they can see it. And this is helping our customers manage their supply chains.
Yeah, and Chad, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on e-commerce as well. How is CR England thinking about e-commerce, and how do you think it might affect freight distribution strategies overall moving forward?
It's funny, a few years ago, we were approached, somebody said, hey, all this online shopping has got to be terrible for your business. As if electronically somehow goods get transferred to somebody. There's trucks in between, and so we've in a major way adapted and adjusted. In fact, we work a lot with XPO on this. Our dedicated business in our company has grown where now it's the biggest part of our business, and we work with many customers on final mile and local deliveries, and it's at this point, you know, dedicated and final mile are a huge part of our core competency. But you know, there's over the last few years, certainly there's been a strong deterioration to our overall length of haul. We've seen localization of freight. You know, data utilization predicts buying habits. It get down to the product, even SKU specific needs, and it's exciting. It's incredibly dynamic, and we're glad to be part of it. So, you know, e-commerce is here to stay, and we're happy to be a part of that. You know, but the thing that we're comforted by is we'll continue to see a migration to localization in e-commerce with more local DCs, but that freight still has to get from the DC, from the manufacturer grower by truckload, and we're here to help with that too.
Got it. Now, and of course, in the early days of the pandemic, when you know this was still, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty, and you know there was some, you know, panic buying, especially at grocery stores. You know, I mentioned this earlier, but you know, it was pretty remarkable, I think, how well the nation's food supply seemed to hold up. You know, there were some, you know, outbreaks at some meat processing plants, but you know, generally you go to the store, and even with the panic buying, you know, food was very much widely available. And you know, C.R. England, you're one of the country's largest transporters of refrigerated freight. So I'd like to get your perspective on this, Chad. You know, how well do you think the nation's food supply chain performed during the pandemic? And, you know, are there any takeaways or things that you think might change as a result of this experience?
Well, better than I would have expected, knowing how severe the pandemic was, is the easy part of the answer. And same goes for our business. However, still some major bumps in the road, some very difficult things. So obviously, as we all know, so much pressure went on grocery retailers as opposed to food service and restaurants, where you know, I think the stats that I heard were grocery was up 70% and food service was down 50%. So you know, I'm probably talking to a lot of trucking company people, and depending on who you're aligned with your customer base, you probably felt it differently. We were thankful to be very diversified, to where some segments of our business were way up and other parts were way down. Amazingly, in most cases, it kind of balanced itself out for us. But you know, there were some disappointments as well. You know, there's all kinds of waste that happened. You know, there were crops that weren't being harvested, milk being dumped. There, you know, the meat industry had probably bigger problems than anybody I can think of, where they're having issues with people not wanting to come to work because of COVID and some problems at plants and labor issues. And yeah, the meat industry was as disrupted as anything that I saw. But the good news is, at this point, you know, I would say they're back. It's not, maybe not 100%, but in most cases, they are pretty close to fully recovered. And you know, customer demand in general right now is the highest I've seen in years and years, if not ever.
Now, apart from the coronavirus pandemic, you know, this has also been a significant time of change for international trade. You know, of course, the USMCA agreement has replaced NAFTA. You know, Brexit is partially done, but still, you know, going on. And of course, there's been all the tariff changes and the ongoing trade war with the U.S. and China. So I just want to get your thoughts on how your businesses have been adjusting to this pretty significantly shifting landscape for global trade. And I'll start with you, Drew. You know, how have you at XPO been managing through all these changes?
A few questions ago, Seth, we talked about nearshoring, and that's really where it starts. And we expect that trend to continue in the current environment over the next few years. Now, when you start looking at the political landscape and what's coming forward, our customers are really, really smart. And this is something that they're always assessing the political risk when they're making their supply chain and transportation decisions. And we're working with them on a daily basis on what that looks like.
Got it. Chad, you're going to hear your thoughts as well on, you know, again, international trade, USMCA, really just kind of a recalibration and adjustment of these trade deals?
You bet. I mentioned earlier we're a leader on our southern border with Mexico, and then we're also a leader in refrigerated intermodal. So these issues hit home hard, and we think about them a lot. Network balance is the key that we really think about. Is first of all, stability of the situation. What our balances are going to be like, and so we really focus on California and the southern border as what gives us the most attention. Now, we are very pleased with USMCA that it was finally signed and ratified by all three countries, and companies are now more comfortable to schedule manufacturing, site contracts, plan their budgets. That's good for business, and we share this confidence. So, we're less certain on California as it relates to U.S.-China relations. That's a little iffier, but for now, we try and design the network to support our customers, and we're hoping that we'll see more certainty after the election in November, whichever way it goes.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. And I'm curious to just hear a little bit more about how the two of you spend your time. I know, of course, it's clear now that transportation companies have been dealing with just a really unpredictable and rapidly changing business environment over these past few years, and especially this year. So just how much time and effort do you spend on, say, risk management compared to day-to-day management concerns and business optimization and business expansion? Drew, I'll start with you. How much is this sort of area of risk management and risk planning, how much time is spent on that area?
Yeah, risk management is something that we spend a lot of time, but at XPO, it's not one or the other. All risk management, keeping the operations day to day, and as well as looking at the future growth are all part of our DNA. So they're in every single conversation of what we're doing. I'll tell you three pillars that we've got that we're really focused on right now and every day. The first one's obviously the employee safety. We've talked about the testing, the deep cleanings, the tracing, social distancing, and all that stuff, but we're very focused on making sure that our employees are coming to work in a safe environment. The second one is continuing to keep the operations up and running. Our customers depended on us to have our operations up and running through the pandemic, and a lot of them depended on us to keep their doors open through this because our customers were hit very hard through the pandemic. And I was proud of the way that our tech team was able to respond, because literally overnight, we shifted thousands of people to work remotely and work from home on a day. And the last one that you're talking about, the growth, is customer solutions. We don't ever want to put our customers in a box and say, doing business with XPO has to look like this. We want to be able to work with our customers and make tailor-made solutions, multimodal solutions using great technology. And our customers have appreciated that so far through the pandemic. So for us, it's not a, risk management versus operations versus growth. It's really having all three embedded into our core DNA and who we are at XPO.
Got it. And Chad, I'll give you a chance to respond to that same question on, how much of your time and effort goes into, planning for risk management and, disruption versus, the more day-to-day concerns.
I love Drew's answer because you can't separate safety from the rest of the business. And in fact, we adopted the mantra "safe and on time every time," which we give out, the fluorescent jackets to our drivers for safety purposes, and we have that emblazoned on them, safe and on time every time, because to us, it's all part of the same process. So, but you asked about, risk management, and fortunately, the amount of time we spend on risk management has grown tremendously because of so many changes. So I'm going to complain a little bit, there's, and risk comes from so many different angles these days. Of course, there's accidents and plaintiffs' lawyers and, life care medical plans and nuclear verdicts. And, but in addition to that, there's aggressive wage and hour litigation. There's runaway labor legislation. There's insurance that's going out of control, and where some companies can't even get insurance at different layers. you have government investigators and union recruiters maintaining their steady advance. And trucking and transportation, I guess the way I'd say it is it's no longer just about moving products from A to B. We now have to deal with risks that range from A to Z. So, you know, I spent a few years as our VP of safety, and now as CEO, it seems like I spend almost as much time on risk management now as I did back then because of the landscape that we're in. So it's just part of the business. And if you're not good at being safe, if you're not good at taking care of your people and the general public, you don't have any business in this industry.
Yeah. Now, before we wrap up, I also want to leave on a sort of a forward-looking note and just to look ahead at our industry's future. So I'd like both of you to share any final thoughts you may have on how the freight transportation industry is going to change in the years ahead. Drew, I'll give you the first shot at this one. What's our industry going to look like? Crystal ball question. 5-10 years down the line.
Seth, you said it whenever you asked the question. It's a crystal ball question, right? And I think when you look at what the last 24 months has been like, it's been a very volatile market. It's gone from a very tight market to an extremely loose market to a very tight market again. And I think that you're going to continue to see that. You're going to continue to see waves within the transportation. And, again, customers are going to look for the people who they know are going to be here tomorrow with them and who are going to be able to create unique solutions to service their needs, and partners that are giving them great service, technology platforms, and then partners who are able to flex up and down on the capacity side. So I think that we're in for, I don't see the market changing, and I think it's been a roller coaster for the last 24 months, and I think it'll continue.
Chad, final thoughts to leave us with?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'd like to focus on is I think we're going to see, we're going to continue to see, and even maybe accelerating with the tight market that we have now. I think trucking capacity is going to be harder and harder to find, because I think it's going to be harder and harder to get good quality drivers that can do the job in a safe and productive way. So I foresee, because of that tightness, because of the shortage on drivers, I think we're going to see transportation will get more expensive, and hopefully the more expensive part of transportation will be passed on to our drivers. That we'll see wages going up. That we'll see that will create less turnover, more retention, and we'll see drivers stick at the same place a little bit more than they have in the past. When that happens, our industry will get safer. We'll provide better service. So we've got to focus on that. And as a carrier, I'll tell you, we are so determined to make sure that we have great jobs for our people, because as we do that, as we protect our drivers, as we make sure that we're giving them the best career opportunities that they can have, we'll find success. And I think that's, as much as anything, the key to winning in transportation these days.
Well, it'll certainly be fascinating to see what the future holds, though let's all hope that it'll be less tumultuous than 2020 has been thus far. I do think that's a good place to leave it. So at this point, I'd just like to thank you both for sharing your insights on risk management and the future of the supply chain. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
Yep. And of course, to our viewers, thank you for watching. And I hope you'll stay tuned as we continue the conversation about the future of freight.
Thank you, Seth, Chad, and Drew, for that insightful conversation. One of the primary ways trucking and logistics companies have created efficiencies and charted a plan for growth is through technology innovation. Whether it's been incorporating AI, driver assist technologies, or data analytics, tech investments continue to be key. Seth Clevenger will join us again to discuss some of this investment strategy with 3 industry leaders: Sid Brown, the CEO of NFI, Jason Ringenberg, the CIO for YRC Worldwide, and Drew McElroy, the chairman and co-founder of Transfix. Stay tuned for an exciting discussion on tech future-proofing.
Hello, I'm Seth Clevenger, Managing Editor of Features at Transport Topics, and I'm excited to welcome you to this final panel discussion of our virtual summit on the future of freight and supply chain management. In this session, we're going to discuss next-generation tech investments and future-proofing in the transportation industry. trucking and logistics companies have been incorporating increasingly sophisticated technologies into their operations, including data analytics, artificial intelligence, business process automation, as well as the first wave of electric-powered trucks and advanced driver assist capabilities. In the past, transportation companies have been testing and implementing these technologies primarily as a way to improve efficiency. But in light of the coronavirus pandemic, many are also viewing these investments as tools to increase resiliency during uncertain times. To help us learn more about where the industry is headed, I'm thrilled to welcome three industry leaders. First, I'd like to introduce Sid Brown, CEO of NFI Industries, a major provider of trucking, logistics, warehousing, and distribution services with more than $2 billion in annual revenue. Also joining the panel is Drew McElroy, co-founder and chairman of Transfix, a digital freight marketplace founded in 2013 with the goal of using technology to reduce costs and improve efficiency in the truckload freight market. And I'm also pleased to welcome Jason Ringenberg, Chief Information Officer at YRC Worldwide, one of the largest less-than-truckload carriers in North America. This is really a great lineup for a panel like this, so I'd like to thank you all for joining us and really looking forward to getting into this. And I'll start with a conversation by reflecting on the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course has been just an extremely disruptive event for much of the freight transportation industry, especially in the early days of the pandemic. So I'd like to ask each of you to go through and just tell us how your companies were able to adjust to these challenges, while also explaining the role that your technology investments have played in that response. So I'll start with you, Sid. How did NFI adapt to this crisis, and what role did technology play?
So thanks, Seth, and thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. Appreciate it. So when we first dealt with this crisis, it was a matter of getting everybody together in one shot and saying, okay, how bad is this going to be? Nobody had any idea when you kind of think back to it. So we planned for the worst and hoped for the best. So we expected somewhere around the 20 to 25% reduction in our revenue base. We fortunately have a lot of customers that are essential shippers, so we knew we had a kind of a mark that we didn't think we would go below, but still 20% hit's a pretty big hit. So we had to make some tough decisions. I brought everybody together, and fortunately for me, I've been through 4 of these before. I always know at the end of the day, things will get better. Sometimes people forget about that, but ultimately things recover. So I wanted to make decisions that made sense. What enabled me to have a lot of confidence were really the fact that we were prepared to go remote, and our IT group and the systems we had in place allowed us to do that from a corporate standpoint. But obviously, all our field operations, between our transport operations, our cross-dock operations, our fulfillment operations, our core warehousing operations, our freight brokerage, those folks were all field ops, and they reported to work every day, and they were really our everyday heroes. But our technology allowed us to kind of operate almost seamlessly from what we were doing to what we had to do. And I attribute that to large infrastructure investments we've made over the last few years in our systems across all our service offerings. But really, at the end of the day, I think remaining calm, segregating out the noise of what's real from what's fiction in terms of what you hear out there, and approaching it with a sense of urgency, but clarity. And so we went about it. I made some tough decisions, furloughing people, freezing wages, cutting back on 401k. I mean, things you don't want to do, but nobody knew what to expect. And then I over-communicated with my team, and I communicated with our employees. I did bi-weekly videos in the beginning to let everybody know what was going on, because there was a lot of fear out there in the marketplace. We were able to kind of, at that point, go along as the world was going along. Fortunately for us, our business did not see the dip that we expected. In fact, we only saw about a 4% dip, because while some folks were going down or shutting down, other folks were shipping like crazy, particularly the grocery houses, for example, and the appliance folks, for example. So we were able to really reposition assets from one operation to another to handle the surges over here and the shutdowns over here. But even besides that, at the end of the day, we did have employees, and I think our peak, we had about 650 employees that we had to furlough out of about 15,000. So when you look at it, it's about 4% of our workforce. You know, one of the things that also happened, all of a sudden travel, you know, restrict travel. Nobody's going anywhere. And as evidenced by this video, you know, everybody's doing it by video now. And that really changed the perception of how people could interact with people, how we could onboard people, how we could train people, how we could deal with customers. So it really was a combination of being able to call audibles every day almost for a while there, because you never knew what the regulations were going to be from one day to the next. That has all settled down to a certain extent as you look back at it now, 5-6 months later. What hasn't changed is the travel. We're still not, unless we have startups that we have to, and we do have a bunch of startups going on, that you have, you know, you might have to send support. But even then, our IT support, which used to go on site, is doing a lot of this by video today. So our travel and expense budget is substantially down, which has happened to help our profitability, like a lot of other things. And I think we're all going to learn to figure out where the right mark is for having travel. Because I do believe at some point you do have to have some interactions. You do have to have management out there meeting with, you know, the operations folks, and getting to see your customers. But there were no expectations in the beginning for people to actually go and see each other. And so I think it worked, but I think over time that will change. So when you look at it, I think, you know, as a leader, you want to lead. And I believe that what we did as an organization was make some hard decisions quickly, monitor the situation, ignore a lot of the noise of, you know, what was out there and really try to get the facts, and then continue to guide the company forward. And since that time, we've been able to reinstate the wages to where they needed to be. The 401k has been reinstated. And fortunately for us, our company is having a record year in terms of revenue and earnings, and we're very fortunate to be on that side of the fence.
Well, it's great to hear that things have definitely improved, and you know we're starting to see our pathway through, you know, all this disruption. And Jason, I want to turn to you next. You know, how did YRC adapt to, you know, all these challenges and the market volatility that was caused by this pandemic? And you know, can you speak to the technology that helped you manage through this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first and foremost, just like I said, I mean, you know, the vast majority of our people still reported to a terminal every day. So all of our frontline truck drivers and our line haul drivers, our pickup and delivery drivers, our dock workers, you know, they went to work every day delivering what we used to call essential freight back during those days of the lockdown. So first and foremost, we all owe them a debt of gratitude for the work that they did. From a technology perspective, you know, there's really 3 or 4 things that it helped us with. So first of all, when it comes to our network and the optimization of our network, when we did run into hotspots because of COVID and we had areas of the country that were shut down or areas of the country where not all of our drivers could get to a terminal, we were able to reroute that freight, you know, to the next closest terminal to try to be able to service those customers as best we could when there were hotspots or flare-ups that didn't allow the normal course or the normal route to be honored. You know, the second thing that we did is we made a lot of investments, as I'm sure all of the panelists and other companies have over the last few years, in the technology that our back office workers, you know, use, and that allowed them to be able to work from home. So investments that we've made in cloud solutions, investments that we've made in video conferencing, you know, investments that we've made in firewalls and different cyber aspects of it allowed the vast majority of our people that work in one of our office locations or one of our headquarters locations to be able to quickly, you know, work from home without missing a beat. And then I would say, you know, last, Seth, one of the things that's come out of this, as Sid said, you know, travel has been nearly non-existent. So we've been able to use some of that technology that we use inside of our 4 walls with our customers. We've been able to do lots more video sales calls. We've been able to do lots more meetings and, you know, onboarding of customers and things with video that before we normally would have flown somebody, you know, to get there. So from a sales perspective, from a network optimization perspective, it's been there. And then obviously the input, you know, the investments that everybody's made in their web technologies to help answer and provide our customers better levels of, you know, self-service as, you know, call centers and things might have been disrupted in the operations. All of those things helped us, you know, to continue through the early days of the pandemic when we had the initial dip in volume, and then as that volume has started to come back.
Well, thank you, Jason. And Drew, I want to turn to you next. Talk us through how Transfix responded to this crisis when it hit. And of course, you are a technology company and a transportation company at your core. So how did you make this adjustment to this new world?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, Seth, thanks very much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel with these other fine gentlemen. So it was a little bit different for us relative to the other two companies here. Obviously, our employee headcount is a bit smaller, and we're a non-asset-based company, so slightly different answer. But we are also headquartered in New York City. So we were, we felt at least we were sort of in the eye of the storm at the very beginning. And so initially, of course, the first thing was focus on our business and our team, make sure everybody's healthy and safe and all that good stuff. And I'm incredibly proud of sort of the stack that we have built. We made the decision, I believe it was March 14th, to go 100% remote indefinitely. And we were 100% remote on March 16th. So within 48 hours, and throughout, even at the very beginning and throughout the course of the evolving events here, our per person productivity is actually up. So incredibly proud of the sort of internal work we've done, and that came together very quickly, frankly. And so that allowed us to then turn our attention to those that we serve, meaning both the carriers and drivers as well as our shipper partners. And actually, before I mention the technology, I'll actually talk about sort of the human side of it, believe it or not, because that's sort of where we started, right? This was a bit of a gut check moment. So on the carrier side, we partnered with an organization called TIER, which is the Truckers Emergency Aid Response Network, and we're donating PPE at truck stops all over the country and sort of tracking our PPP inventory digitally. And we started a Pay It Forward campaign where we were giving our sort of core drivers. Frankly, we're just giving them, that wasn't money, it was gift cards, but we were just trying to help because this was not the time to pinch pennies. So that was it. We did those things to make sure we shored up our supply base at obviously a very volatile time. And then we of course turned our attention to our shippers, who, as Sid mentioned, it's interesting. It was a very bifurcated sort of result, right? There were those businesses that effectively got whacked and had almost nothing going on for a period of time. But then the other side of the coin was the businesses that went absolutely gangbusters. And we were fortunate that not only were we able to serve those businesses from a capacity and execution standpoint, but some of the features of our platform started to take on a new life in the context of the pandemic, right? Things like digital PODs, right? Historically, we would talk about that as an opportunity to save time and manage paperwork in an effective way, which is great. But then when you layer it on, oh, by the way, it's now touchless and you don't actually have to even interact with anybody, and you can minimize the risk. Those sort of digital aspects of our business took on an entirely new level of value in the sort of context of what was happening out there. So the real truth is I'm incredibly proud of the work that our team has done to sort of support both ourselves and sort of our external partners. I won't call it seamless, but it was, considering, I think we did one hell of a job.
Well, thank you, Drew. And, looking ahead, one interesting question that hasn't been answered definitively yet is how this pandemic is going to affect technology adoption in the trucking industry. Of course, on one hand, many companies have really lost a lot of revenue as a result of this disruption. So, of course, maybe that means that there's just less capital to invest. But at the same time, I also hear that the pandemic has really shined a spotlight on how important it is for transportation companies to be nimble enough to adjust their freight networks during such volatile conditions. So I'd like to hear from our panelists on this. I'll start with you, Sid. How do you think that this historic event is going to change the way that transportation companies think about technology?
Well, I think it was a pause for a lot of folks, but the mission still remained. How do we, get better utilization, asset utilization? How do we provide better data to our customers and to our internal employees so that we can manage our fleets better and try to optimize where possible in terms of that? And we've been working on some AI, I'll call it stuff, because it's kind of pretty complex with some pretty complex algorithms in place, but doing some predictive analytics around, can we take our customers' data and figure out how we can plan for the optimum fleet size, and then we can share fleets a little bit more effectively from multiple customers. We focus on the dedicated fleet side of the house, and so it's real important for us to try to see where we can maximize between customers when possible. And then on our warehousing side, can we take and optimize our workforce in order to take the projections and see, lots of companies have projections. The validity of those projections can vary widely. So what we're trying to do is take historical data and formulate it for the future. The problem with that today, and I see the problem, is we are under a new paradigm. So taking historical shipping patterns and trying to predict what's going on now, you almost have to throw it out because we're under a completely new scenario. So as the leader of our company, there was a period of time where I paused on some initiatives just because nobody knew what was going on. But we have quickly expedited our investments in continued investments in cybersecurity, which is paramount for us in terms of our operations and our continuity plans, continued investments in the rollout of our new systems across our platforms so that we have continued consistency amongst what we do for our customers. And the other thing that we're continuing to do is upgrade the hardware and the software where necessary, or put more onto the cloud where we can in order to ensure the viability of our operations. It was interesting when this whole hit, everybody was saying, all right, what's your business continuity plan? What's your business continuity plan? So everybody was saying, oh, okay, here, let's bring it off the shelf and show our customers our business continuity plan. And a lot of times I think they were asking us for it because they didn't have something and they were looking and scrambling because nobody had a continuity plan for what a pandemic would do to the world. And if they told you they did, I don't believe it because nobody was expecting this. So it's been interesting to kind of see, the ebb and flow of the investment dollars that we're putting into technology over time. But I can tell you, we also have a big initiative going on where we have a group of folks trying to create what we think is the next state-of-the-art TM package for our freight brokerage and our transportation management group, which we will ultimately bring into our dedicated fleet group. So it's all about data. And the more you can get your arms around this data, the more you can measure it, you can manage it. And so that's where we're focused. You can, whether it's business intelligence, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, it's all about getting the data into one repository where you can really begin to measure.
Well, like you said, and Jason, I'd like to get your vantage point as well. How do you think that this, again, historic event is going to change technology investment in the transportation industry?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think there's going to be a cutback in spending on technology because of the pandemic. Was there a pause across a lot of different industries and a lot of folks in our industry? I think there was. And most of those pauses have probably stopped by now. One of the areas I think you're going to see a lot more focus and ramped up investment, and Drew alluded to it earlier, is now everything wants to be contactless. So that digitization of the supply chain and the digitization of those documents, in our case, the bills of lading, the delivery receipts, things like that have been around for a long time. You're going to see continued investment in that. As Sid said, cybersecurity is probably more of a concern for a lot of people now. The bad guys didn't take time off during the pandemic. The bad guys looked for weaknesses and vulnerabilities because people weren't behind necessarily always the firewall that they were when they were in their office. So I think you're going to see, continued focus, in and around there. ATA's got their own, SciWatch program that many people are involved in. So I think you're going to see continuation there. I think all of the data that's available today, including in that is, videos and pictures, is going to become more and more pervasive. There's going to be more spend in those areas. I think if you look at some of the larger, cloud service providers, whether that's, Oracle or Microsoft, Google, and AWS or Amazon, are the ones most frequently talked about. They have tremendous machine learning capabilities. We are an industry that takes a lot of pictures. So how can you use those pictures in conjunction with those four providers or the other big cloud service providers to try to drive machine learning and make efficiency improvements? And then I also think you're just going to see continued investment in IP technologies associated with the drivers and the trucks. So call it Internet of Things. How does that change when we get to more of a 5G rollout, et cetera? And I think, you'll see more and more of that, whether it's the driver devices, whether it's safety devices, whether it's cameras, technologies, GPS locations will continue to proliferate the industry. And if you kind of take a look at several of those different components, whether it's, LiDAR and the radars that are needed, for autonomous vehicles, it's going to be 5G technologies, edge computing, Internet of Things, all of those things that kind of culminate together, in and around solutions for autonomous vehicles. So I don't think you're going to see a slowdown in spend in technology. I think it was more of a pause. I think things are going back to normal. And ultimately, I think technology spend is going to continue to increase across everybody in the industry, from the asset, based companies like ours to the asset light or the no asset companies. I think it's going to be pervasive everywhere.
Great. I'll get your take as well, Drew. How do you see technology spend, technology investment moving forward in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly I believe that investment in technology is going to continue to increase. I think that the slope of that curve is increasing and not the other way. I think when we look back on this period of time in history, the biggest thing from my perspective, the way I find myself thinking about it, is it's an accelerator of already existing trends. And we're finding out very quickly, both on the sort of the 3PL side and frankly on the shipper, specifically on the retail side, which businesses made the proper investments before this and which did not. And so in many ways, this is like the arbiter of the future. Like, are you going to survive or are you not? And so like anything, those businesses that are unable to invest, I think the gap between the haves and the have-nots is going to widen. And those businesses that can make the proper investments will be that much more differentiated frankly, even right now, but especially on the way out of this. And as I sort of alluded to in the last question, we're very fortunate that, because of our sort of nascency and the way we built our platform, we were able to sort of respond quite quickly. And so we focused our attention on how do we help our constituents? And so, frankly speaking, on the carrier side, a lot of that tech, touchless and all that fun stuff, was already deployed. And so the conversation we had with those folks is more about how do you ensure that you don't get stuck, either in a biological hotspot or in a place you've never been, and the economics of the truck get really, really bad really quickly. And so we had, prior to the pandemic, we had launched our core carrier program, which is effectively moving toward like a quasi-dedicated model of time-based purchasing rather than load-based purchasing. And of course, one of the value props to the carrier side when we do that is the volatility curve gets flattened. And as perhaps you can imagine, the sort of uptake and adoption of that program at the beginning days of the pandemic was almost to the point where we had to pump the brakes and make sure that we weren't taking on too much so that we could continue to serve the folks who came on. So that was frankly, I think, very good for the carriers and very good for our business, because it sort of shored up our capacity in a way that I think is hard for non-asset based businesses to traditionally do. And so that allowed us to, again, turn to sort of the shipper side. And, the preponderance of our customers are either big retail or sort of big CPG serving retail. And again, it sort of became that binary thing, right? Either you're trying to save every single penny you possibly can, or you're trying to do the proper things to make sure you serve your customers, maintain inventory levels and everything else. And, frankly speaking, we work with both types of customer, but I would say those who are most progressive about this and who are, reallocating inventory and saying, okay, well, how do we make sure we can do, true omni-channel, whether it's order online and pick up at the curb or whatever it might be, making sure that all of that was supported by data and visibility and transparency and all that good stuff, in sort of the backdrop of no one having any idea what's going on. Like I said, I think that sort of proved well for our business, but I think more importantly, it allowed our customers to continue to operate and sell widgets, which if you don't do that, you're in big trouble.
No, I think that, pretty much across the board, we heard from this panel that, technology is indeed, core to the future of our industry. And another example of the types of technological changes we're seeing is also taking place in trucking equipment. So truck manufacturers and their fleet customers are now beginning to test electric-powered commercial trucks, not just something that you see on a trade show floor, but in real-world freight operations. And again, it's early days, but it's helping to pave the way for broader adoption in the years ahead. And this is quite a change. I mean, this is a brand new vehicle category in the commercial truck market, and just so happens that NFI has been among the first to actually deploy these vehicles, in this case through partnerships with Daimler and Volvo. So Sid, can you just tell us a little bit about your experience so far with electric trucks? How have they been performing to this point, and how have your employees reacted, especially your drivers?
Yeah, just so for reference, it was a little over a year ago that we unveiled these trucks out in California with Freightliner, and we put 10 of them in use down at the LA ports, between the LA ports and our Chino campus, where we run a big warehouse campus. And we began to test these as they came in, and we've learned a lot. And so what did we learn? Some things. Driver behaviors change a little bit. Drivers' perceptions of what they should be doing in terms of the acceleration or deacceleration on the trucks are a little bit different. Highway traffic will impact battery life, which we didn't really realize would happen. Weight will impact battery life more than we expected. The stop and go traffic has both its positives and negatives on battery life. So a lot of learnings as we go and we try to utilize these trucks and learn from them. So we've been tinkering with them with Freightliner in the beginning to kind of see if we can maximize battery life and maximize utilization of the trucks. And so the haul between the port and the warehouse is, I think it's about 60 miles. So, our goal was to try to make 2 turns a day. In the beginning, we weren't getting 2 turns a day. We're getting about a turn and a half. We put chargers in. We invested in the chargers. Between Freightliner's investment and our investments, this is millions of dollars in order to begin the process of learning and figuring it out. Followed by 2 trucks that have recently come in that we just announced with Volvo, part of the first Class 8 trucks that Volvo has, that we're going to put in similar applications to start seeing, and we're learning from Volvo out there in Southern California as well. Fortunately for us, our average length of haul is less than 200 miles. And so therefore we have a great application to go out and come back across all 4,500 trucks that we operate day in and day out. So we believe over time that this application makes a lot of sense for us. We also have a lot of warehouses that we think we can put solar panels on, and we're working with Volvo on this now, excuse me, to allow the panels to put the charging stations down below by the warehouse yard, and so it's a closed loop system. And we're hoping to really see the benefits of that over a period of time. But if you think about an electric truck, those things will last a lot longer. There's a lot less moving parts. There's a lot less requirements for technicians to fix all those moving parts. And it's hard to find technicians out there today. So the useful life of these trucks is going to be much greater. The battery technology will continue to change. So you'll put in new battery technology as you continue to move forward. So we're at the infancy of this. There's a lot of testing. Nobody's in mass production right now. Everybody's claiming that they're going to be there quickly. I think we're still about 18 months away from one of the OEMs really beginning to deliver the technology on a mass production or a scaled production scenario. But I made the comment, I don't know if you remember, Seth, that I thought that I went out on a limb and I thought that by 2025, 30 to 40% of our fleet would be electrified. The only thing that might hold that back is more the manufacturer than us. And, some of the grants that the states have still need to be worked out because California is a leader in this, and they're doing a wonderful job of promoting clean air. And I think everybody has seen that just recently they said, no more passenger cars with diesel gas as of 2035. So there's a big push to clean the air up in not only California, but really through many states in the country. So I think the regulatory environment will catch up a little bit with where the technology is over a period of time, but we're excited about the opportunity to bring electric trucks to the forefront of our fleet for our drivers and do the right thing for the environment and cut down on our carbon footprint. Nobody, and if you look at the major manufacturers, the OEMs, are really spending a lot of time reinvesting in the diesel-powered engine anymore. They're just kind of going to continue to ride out what they've done. They're putting all their money, if they're smart, and most of them are, into electrification going forward.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating to watch this whole new category of the commercial vehicle market emerge before our very eyes. And like you said, it's in its infancy, but we can see the potential in the years ahead. But Jason, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. What's YRC's view, not only on electric trucks, but maybe all other alternative fuels and trucking? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with electrification, I think it's, it's important. It's something that we're currently watching, very closely. We think there's a lot of use cases for it. Some of the things that, Sid mentioned, some of the shorter hauls, we think those use cases will come along, sooner than that. And some of our businesses, our length of hauls, much longer than that. So it's not only the truck and the batteries and how long the battery lasts, but it's how do you charge those batteries when you have people that need to drive distances or teams of people that need to drive distances longer than the batteries can go, on a full charge. So one of the other things, we've looked at and have continued to look closely at is, what about clean diesel? I mean, because if you just look at the diesel engines, if I'm not mistaken, I think 96, 97-ish% of the trucks on the road today run diesel. If you look at those diesel engines and the clean diesels, I think it's somewhere around 60 diesel engines today produce the same particulate count as one truck, from 1988. So there's got to be, some bridge to electrification. We think that clean diesel is at least, one of those bridges. CARB and the mandates that are coming out of California, I think everybody understands that they're coming. So for us, electrification is something that's there. As others have mentioned on the panel today, the maintenance associated with one of those is going to be a lot less. It's going to be a lot easier to maintain those. They're going to have probably fewer breakdowns, but it's all about batteries. Tesla from a, non-commercial, but really from a consumer perspective, had their battery day the other day. They think they can get the price of a Tesla automobile that was supposed to sell for $35,000, but in actuality is sold closer to $50,000, their Model 3 on average. They think they can get a battery that's going to, lower the price of that to $25,000 and be able to go further. When you start talking about that type of jump in battery capacity, when you start to talk about that type of reduction in the cost of a battery, that I think becomes game-changing or more game-changing for our industry, because the use cases that you could use that for in our business, the options, that Sid talked about, where you have to go turn a railhead or you go to turn a port or some of those things where the length of haul is relatively short and you have a facility on one length of that turn, that's maybe one of the earlier use cases. And maybe one of the furthest down the road use cases are those team drivers that you have that are going to pick up a load of freight on one of the coasts and over the next several days drive it to the other coast. And then I think it's as much or more about the charging infrastructure that's available to those drivers on the road as it is necessarily about, the batteries and some of the things, in the cabs. But to try to, reduce emissions, to try to, reduce carbon footprints, all of those things are here to stay. It's going to be a great change for our industry when it comes along. And I think it will stage itself in, over time. And hopefully clean diesels and maybe some of the other, biofuels help provide a bridge to that, cleaner world where we can have, electrification that is hopefully someday solar powered and other, less polluting sources of the ultimate charge itself.
Yeah, and I think that, you make a good point about, the application is really key, at least in the near term. Electrification can make sense for, port drayage, short haul, urban distribution,
sure.
Applications like that. But, for example, a regular route, truckload, of course, you need a place to charge, and, you're limited by the battery range and the vehicle weight. So there are many factors to consider. And, we're at the very, beginning of this very interesting change and new category of vehicle. And of course, diesel will be a big part of the industry for years to come.
Seth,
Yes.
I might want to add one other area that
Certainly.
Yard spotting, and I forgot to mention that with Calmar, I think we've got like 30 electric yard trucks working in California now, and that's going to be a huge opportunity. Think about all the yard trucks and the yard spotting that are just a real natural because they're not going anywhere. And so, and not only with the yard spotting with the electric, but then you can adopt the autonomous electric truck right in the yard too. So a lot of research is going on that end as well.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good segue, I think, to talk about automated driving technology. Of course, that's been another important trend we've seen developing over time. We see this evolution in terms of the active safety systems that are available on the market today, collision mitigation systems, and we're starting to see the very beginning of active steering capabilities added as well. But at the same time, you see technology developers that are testing and refining highly automated vehicles, self-driving trucks on public highways. Especially the Southwest has emerged as a hotbed for testing. NFI, of course, has partnered with Ike, which is one of these companies that's doing this testing. So, Sid, while I have you on this topic, could you just tell us a little bit more about the potential you see for automation, automated driving, driver assist, all the way up to self-driving trucks in our industry?
So, first of all, my brother, his first name is Ike, and I want to make a disclaimer. He has nothing to do with Ike the automation, but he got interviewed regarding our, partnership with Ike. And, so here's the way we look at it. You really still got a long ways to go. And not just from a technology standpoint, but from a regulatory standpoint. And I fear that maybe the technology will beat the regulatory environment there. We don't right now see the day, at least for the next 5 to 6 years or longer, where that driver is going to be totally displaced out of that cab. Just from, if you look at airlines today, they still have pilots. Why do they have pilots? The technology's there. Those planes can fly by themselves. They got the drones that fly by themselves. That technology is available. It's the just in case right now. And I think from a regulatory standpoint, that just in case is going to stick around for a while with the driver in the truck. However, it will take and alleviate, particularly on the long haul, where you can put a driver, maybe you put one driver in a lead truck and maybe a second truck follows behind it and so forth. You got 3 trucks, but the longer haul may give the driver the opportunity to be less impacted by the stress of driving the truck because it essentially will drive itself for the most part. In the urban environments and the environments that have much more impacts by weather, it's going to take longer to develop that technology because there's more variables that need to be associated with it. But there's a lot of dollars going into it. And what I do see is a lot of these dollars are ending up with companies that are partnering with the OEMs. And it's on the automobile and it's on the truck side. So I think eventually the OEMs will be the leaders along with whoever they partnered with in bringing the autonomous truck platform to our environment. Someday, maybe when I'm long retired from this business, trucks will be totally autonomous. I'm sure they will be. I mean, it's an inevitable once they get that technology. But I still believe in shorter haul applications where you have to do, make a delivery and unload the trailer. You're going to have a driver in that truck. So I think there's going to be a hybrid. The one thing for sure, people are not raising kids to be truck drivers today. It's not. So we have a shortage. So how do you address a shortage? Through technology. So whether robots in the warehouse, autonomous trucks on the highway, it's still addressing a labor shortage that will exist out there going forward.
Yeah. And Drew, I want to bring you in on this. Of course, you're non-asset-based company, but I think that you're a technology company. You're you're a logistics company. How do you think about automation at Transfix?
Yeah, I mean, so I would agree with what Sid said, that the day of like full level 5 automation where the matrix just takes over and there's no more truck drivers. I think Sid said at the earliest, he said 5 to 6 years. Well, I would take the over on that. I think there's a lot of things to do, both from a technological perspective, which we've mentioned, from a public policy perspective, which we've mentioned, but also from an infrastructure perspective. And Jason touched on this a little bit, but it's not just the charging. It's the actual amount of electricity that's going to be pulled from the grid if this were actually happening in massive scale. So I think all of these things are, it's going to be, it's going to be a steady march toward this future, but I do think it's a ways away. And I do think, and I realize that the driving community is very sensitive about this. As somebody who's in the middle, we're agnostic. We want to work with the best solutions across the board. But when I talk to drivers, listen, the reality is, Sid mentioned airline pilots. Manufacturing has gotten massively automated. There are still manufacturing jobs. And the partnerships that we at Transfix have done with a variety of whether you call it self-driving or all of these companies, it seems to me, with the exception of maybe a few that have very, very deep pockets, most folks are thinking about the middle mile, right? The sort of the highway to the ramp to the ramp. And then if you have that model, well, hell, if you're a truck driver, that could actually make your life a lot better. It makes jobs that are today over the road maybe look like, day jobs, and you get home and things like that. So there are opportunities both from a structural perspective and also just as a personal anecdote, as somebody who lives in New York City and was stuck in my apartment during this pandemic, I went out and bought a car and drove it to California. And that car has pretty significant self-driving. And for what it's worth, driving across the country, I mean, it's still there. I'm still on the wheel, but just the ability to sort of relax your posture and take a step back. I mean, we talk about the health issues in the driving community. Well, the stress of being on the road is no joke. And if these technologies can make you safer, make it a little bit less physically exhausting to do the work you do, those are benefits. So as a personally, not Transfix, I'm bullish on the technology because I think it can save lives in a variety of ways. But I also, like with anything, you don't want the hype to overload us. And there is a ways to go, and incremental steps will be good and perhaps not damaging to any individual, like the truck drivers who think they're maybe not going to have a job or something like that. I don't think that's a massive concern, to be honest. And as Sid said, there is a shortage of truck drivers. I argue about that a little bit because I would say maybe there's a utilization problem, and if you get the utilization right, maybe there's enough truck drivers. But either way, there are probably more truck drivers retiring than coming into the business. So the total sum is going down, and the economy continues to grow. So if you can have the autonomous curve come up and sort of meet the self-drive or the traditional curve, you can have enough capacity in the market.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're kind of addressing that elephant in the room about what automation means for truck drivers, and I'm fully agree with what I've heard on this panel, and I've always been quick to make the argument that automated driving technology is going to complement drivers rather than replace them. And even if you have cases and instances where you can go fully autonomous, it's going to be designed for a specific application. It's not going to be going through Manhattan, for example, or just it's going to be designed for a certain use case. And there's simply no doubt that we're going to need professional truck drivers for the foreseeable future. But to your point, the technology could make those jobs more attractive, safer, better jobs for that next generation of drivers. And Jason, I want to bring you in on this too. You spoke about this topic a little bit earlier, but
yeah,
how do you view automation, and what do you think it means for truck drivers moving forward?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with what Drew just said. In 5 to 6 years, I'm going to take the over on how long we're going to need truck drivers. I think these advanced driver assist systems, I think it's going to be a great thing for safety. I think it's going to be a great thing to help make the job more attractive. And I think everybody on the panel today, and most everybody that's involved in and around technology, thinks that the technology or the underlying components of that technology will be available before the policy is. And today that policy in large extent is done by the states. I mean, certain states let autonomous tests go in, certain states don't. Certain states allow those in our industry to pull triples, other states don't. Some states have more tolls to pay for infrastructure, some states don't. So from a policy perspective, it's just not the folks, Seth, near your office in DC that have to weigh in this. It's the other 50 state capitals. And last time I checked, to get all 50 states to agree to X is a really hard thing to do, regardless of what X is. So I think it's going to be there. And then I just think there's huge societal questions to this. Even if it is safe or the data shows that it's very safe, if you're driving down the road in your minivan with your 2 kids in the car seat and back, are you going to want to see a truck that's carrying 40,000 plus pounds without a driver in it, barreling up behind you, or you're passing that? What are the insurance companies, going to say about this? So there's a lot of constituents to have to, weigh in on this. If you look at the investments today that's being made, I think that's why we think the technology, internally, we think the technology will be available before the policy climate, because the investments being made in, machine learning, the investments being made in the 5G networks, the investments being made in batteries, those things are going to come along. But what about all of the other investments that need to be made? What about all of the other policy concerns that need to be made? So I think there are great jobs for truck drivers for years and years and years to come. I think it might have been Drew that mentioned the middle mile. Certainly there is a case for the middle mile and for platooning and some things like that will have much higher automation than we have today, but not be fully autonomous for quite some time.
Got it. And just shifting gears a little bit here, one of the biggest trends that I've noticed over the last decade in our industry is just an absolute influx of new technology developers, new businesses, startups, venture capital. The saying goes, Silicon Valley has certainly discovered trucking. And my apologies, Drew. Of course, not every tech startup is based in California, but as a tech startup in this field, you grew up in this industry, but again, it's a technology-driven startup. Just tell us about the opportunity that you saw when you decided to start Transfix 7 years ago now. Why did you think that trucking and transportation was ready for some newcomers to bring in a new approach?
So it's funny. I was on a panel the other day, not for our business, but a more generalist one, and the moderator introduced me as a tech CEO, and I was like, no, it's a legit no. But so I whether for better or for worse, it's in my DNA, and it has been for a long time. So what did I see? Well, I mean, bluntly speaking, I saw a lot of unhappy people and a lot of waste. The business that my dad started, that I sort of grew up around, was at its core, at least initially, it was a traditional you call, we haul brokerage, and a very good one, but it was what it was. And I watched every day the amount of paper that got pushed around and just wasted time and just the general unhappiness. Everybody seemed to BS each other, right? The driver said he was there when he wasn't. The broker said the load was ready when it wasn't. And all this misinformation just drove everybody crazy and ultimately wasted a lot of time and money, right? We were fighting over pennies while the dollars were just flying out the window. And so at its basic core, what we set out to do was take technology and basically in 2 forms. One, mobile technology that, at this point in time, we started the business in 2013, every driver had a smartphone, and that was a change that hadn't existed before. And so now there was a way to tether to these drivers to passively collect data without any effort on their part. And so that on the one hand infused a tremendous amount of data about behavior and locations and preferences, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the same time, if you can sort of overlay that with, to keep the buzzwords to a minimum, I'll just say modern data science, right? AI, ML, all that good stuff. But what it really means is a system, a computer, can take huge amounts of data, specifically dynamic data about available trucks and dynamic data about loads that need to be picked up by those trucks, and match them in a way that creates a more efficient set of results than any group of humans can manage. It's just too much data. And so at its core, that's what we set out to do, right? You can put more money in a small trucking company's, P&L by running the same number of miles and the same number of days and the same number of hours if you have a higher percentage of those miles loaded. It's pretty straightforward, right? And so that becomes a positive ROI solution for the carriers. And then, of course, on the shipper side, the transparency and the data collection and the benchmarking and the scorecarding and all that goes along with having an intelligent network as opposed to maybe a blind network, which would exist historically, that creates what we think, and sort of proving itself out to be a win-win for everybody, right? I mean, at its core, the sort of value creation thesis is eliminate and monetize waste and give some of it to everybody involved. And so honestly, I was crazy enough that I actually wrote a business plan when we started this. I don't know too many startups that actually do that, but I actually wrote a business plan. And if you go back and read it, 7 years in, it's basically the same thing. This industry is wasteful and everybody seems pretty cranky. And if you use technology in the right way, you can probably improve them. I won't say it's a silver bullet, right? This is still real life and things still happen out there. But if anything, when things happen, at least you know about it and you can tell everybody involved and, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the mission we've been on. And, knock on wood, fortunately for us here 7 years in, we're accelerating in sort of all ways. Our growth is accelerating, which is interesting. It's not just new partners. It's going deeper with the partners that we have, which in some ways to me is even more telling. At the beginning, you'd talk to a very large retailer who would be like, oh, this is cool. We'll try it. And, here's your 2 lanes or here's a couple of loads. And then, the next year you become a top 5 provider. And then the next year they say, hey, can you help us with this RFP? And it's like, okay, there's something here. The nature of our depth as really driven by data and insights, it's telling, I think, and it's something that we're very proud of.
Well, thank you, Drew. And, another big trend that we see, not just in transportation, but really in all fields of technology across many industries, is the advance of artificial intelligence and machine learning. In trucking, some companies are beginning to use AI to help automate some of the back office processes, freight matching, and just enable some better business decisions that otherwise, humans might not have noticed on their own. And I'm going to point this one to you, Jason, as a CIO. What are your thoughts on, how AI and machine learning can, drive more efficiency in our industry moving forward?
Yeah, I think, everything you mentioned, Seth, robotic process automation, there's going to be a lot of, advancements there. But, when I think about it, or as I've thought about it here recently, I really think more about it from a customer service perspective. So can you use cameras to take pictures to deduce loads that are likely to have damage versus loads that aren't likely to have damage, or understand as you're starting to load a trailer where you have waste in there that you could get more freight on there. So, how can you use these pattern recognitions and the massive amount of computing power that comes from some of the, the larger cloud providers to take thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures to replace things like supervisors going to look at trailers to see, are they loaded properly, or are the trailers full? So how can you concurrently, using machine learning, drive down your cost, free up your supervisors to focus on other things, lower the likelihood that you're going to have a claim and an upset customer? So how can you do all of those with a computer and pictures? There are other applications of it. When you do your pre-trip inspections, could you have those vehicles drive through video and look for cameras or videos, look for things like, tires that are underinflated, or brake lights that don't come on, or hydraulic hoses that may be disconnected, or even if it gets down to, the efficiencies of the skirting and those things that are going to help with your fuel economy until we get to this fully electrified, world going forward, where they would be able to then stop and alter course before that trailer is closed in the case of looking for load quality, and in the case of looking for trailers that are full, or in the case of when you're doing it in the yard, look for those things that you would certainly want to know as a carrier before that truck left the yard to go on to that next destination. I really think that's going to be some of the areas where, specific to transportation, we see, these uses. Obviously, what we talked about earlier with autonomous vehicles, there's massive use cases for artificial intelligence and machine learning. Some of those, as we talked about, have regulatory issues. Some of those have societal questions. But here, I think everybody can agree, if a trailer is full, that's good for all parties. If a trailer is loaded properly, that's good for all parties. And if that equipment, when it hits the street, where we share that with everyday drivers, if it is safer or more ready for that run, I don't think there's any policy concerns. I don't think there's any societal concerns. And I think these are ways where we can use pictures and pattern recognition that isn't profiling the human face, but rather profiling freight in the back of a trailer, or profiling the safety readiness of a tractor-trailer combination as it gets ready to hit the road. And I think those things, the technology is nearly there today and is coming on quickly, and we'll see massive improvements for all across our industry. For us, it makes it more productive. For us, it makes it safer. For all of our customers, it makes it more likely that their shipments are going to get there damage-free. Nothing but goodness associated with it, in my opinion.
Well, this has been an outstanding conversation. I am going to be cognizant of the time, though, and perhaps I'll give each of our panelists one final word on really where you see our industry going in the years ahead. Perhaps we can look ahead 10 years and envision what trucking will look like. Sid, I'll start with you. Any final thoughts on how you see our industry evolving in the years ahead?
So let me go back and qualify. I didn't say that all fleets are going to be running autonomous trucks 5 to 6 years from now, guys. I'd take the over on that bet too. So let me say that. So a couple things. We are already, with technology. So we're doing, through a group called AI Noodle, we're looking at the PMs on our trucks, and we're doing predictive analytics. It used to be that you do a PM and there were 60 things that were on the checklist to do. Well, we're now predicting, there are 60 things you don't have to check, because some of these things, we now have the historical data to say it's not going to be in a failure mode until 60,000 miles instead of 30,000 miles. So now our people are doing their PMs, instead of doing 60, they might be doing 32 items, because the predictive analytics are showing us that we don't have to do all 60 of these. And, just like Jason said, machine learning and automation are all going to continue. Just the way we're, dealing with each other now through video, and the amount of travel that's not going to be there, and those types of things, the way you bring on new business and interact with customers is probably going to be different than what it was before. So in some ways that's good, some ways it's bad. I think in some ways the personal relationships may suffer a little bit, but that's just the way the world's going. What I do see on the trucking side is it's an industry that will continue to have consolidation. You see it in the LTL market. Jason's, there's probably, 5 or 6 major LTL carriers and maybe 35 really LTL carriers in the country today. On the truckload side, there's a ton more. The bigger getting bigger, and we're hopefully going to be part of that bigger. But there's going to continue to be pressure. The insurance markets are going to continue to weed out there's some real pressure in the insurance markets today based on these nuclear verdicts and so forth. So if I were to predict 10 years from now, I think that there's just going to be less carriers running better technology, well capitalized. Some of them will have automated trucks. Some of them will have electric trucks. Some will have natural gas trucks. Some of them will have diesel powered trucks. It's not going to be all one at one time. But just go back 5 years ago, and how many Teslas did you see on the highway? And how many do you see today? And how much you see, think about, it's that curve. When you get that technology comes down, those prices come down on batteries and so forth, you're going to see an explosion on certain technologies that are going to take place. And, so whether it's, what's happening on the technology side, as Drew has alluded to, or Jason has, I just see a convergence of factors that are going to make our industry more efficient. And efficiency will drive down cost, and that will benefit both the customer and the carriers.
Well, thank you, Sid. And Drew, I'd like to pose the same question to you. You know, trucking in 10 years from now, how will it be different?
So I've had two jobs in my career. The first one was at my family's business, and then the second one has been at Transfix, and they've almost been about the same amount of time. And what I can state unequivocally, it's a lot more fun right now. The amount of investment in this business, in our industry collectively, and I mean the supply chain. I don't just mean trucking, right? Whether it's warehouse automation or trucking or robotics, whatever it might be. Man, is it fascinating. And my sort of running statement is every day is a case study. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to make you think, which is a lot more fun than just blocking and tackling. So, and if anything, my core belief is what exactly is going to happen, I don't know. But I believe strongly that the trends we're seeing are only beginning to accelerate, right? Everybody talks about the amount of capital that's come in. I would argue we've seen nothing yet. The capital that has come in thus far has mainly been early stage capital and less risk averse capital because it was at a very nascent point. As businesses that have raised that capital continue to put up results and accelerate and do the things that frankly businesses like ours are doing from a sort of metrics perspective, the sort of pools of capital that are going to be brought to bear on our industry are going to become bigger and more sophisticated. And so, like I say, I think this trend is going to continue to accelerate. We're going to see winners and losers, of course, and I mean that both in the company level and frankly at the pure technological level, right? Some ideas will be proven to be fantastic and some will be proven to be hype and maybe not sustainable. I think anybody suggesting which of those are going to be the winners and losers, I think it's a little premature for that. We have to see what's going to happen. But the reality is the genie is out of the bottle. Those that are outside of our business see how big our business is and see the opportunity financially that can come from improving it. And then when those sorts of folks get their eyes on something, they don't generally stop. So I think that what we've sort of kicked off here is in the early innings. And I think we're going to just continue to see more of it, which I ultimately think is a benefit for everyone, right? It's a benefit for those in our industry in sort of all ways. And I think, we all talk about this, right? Our business touches everything. My mom says everything is delivered by a truck except babies. And so the more we do to improve what it is we do, the more that sort of downstream benefits everybody on this planet. And so as you can perhaps imagine, I'm very bullish about what the future holds. I think it's really exciting.
Take us to trucking in 2030. What's it going to look like? What's the future of our industry?
I mean, I tell you, we should all welcome the technology investments because nothing but good can come from that. If I knew where our industry was going to be in 2030 and which technologies were going to be pervasive, I'd be a hedge fund manager instead of being a CIO. But what I do know is that for the years to come, there are going to be jobs for truck drivers, as we've discussed earlier today, and there's going to be a lot of good jobs available. That technology, well, I don't know exactly what it's going to do. I can tell you it's going to make our drivers more productive. It's going to make our trucks safer. It's going to reduce our carbon footprint. It's going to help our part in the case of the trucking companies. It's going to help us be better members of that supply chain. It's going to help improve society and where we're going. But as far as which of the technologies we talked to today in terms of, autonomous vehicles or AI or machine learning, similar to what Drew said, I don't really know which ones are going to win and which ones are going to lose, but I don't think there's going to be anything but goodness that comes from the investments. Also, like Drew, I believe that we're in the early innings of this. I think the seed capital has started to come in. If you look at our impact from a supply chain perspective on GDP, there's obviously a lot of cost in that supply chain. There's a lot of opportunity in that supply chain. And I think when people start to realize that this technology and you get beyond that seed capital, I think we've only seen what's going to come in terms of, money that's going to be invested and benefits the technology is going to provide. So from an industry perspective as a whole, I think we should be abundantly optimistic about our future. And I think we should welcome and embrace all of the technology advancements that are coming.
Well, thank you for that, and I think that's a great place to leave it off. This is again, I think it's been an outstanding conversation, but there is a time limit, unfortunately. But again, I'd like to thank all three of you for sharing your excellent insights into where this industry is headed. And I think it's really valuable for us all to think about what the future may hold. And to our audience, of course, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll stay tuned for some closing remarks.
Thank you to our panelists and Seth for that interesting conversation. And that brings us to the end of today's symposium. I want to thank Secretary CHAO, Senator CARDIN, Representative Graves, and all the panelists for joining us today. We certainly have covered a lot of ground. As our panelists have suggested, regardless of the strain the pandemic has placed on freight, companies are finding a way forward to adjust to new challenges. At the same time, COVID-19 seems to have offered a backdrop upon which technologies are being tested and explored and are helping freight companies continue to grow and thrive.
Senator CARDIN and Congressman Graves both reflected on lessons learned from COVID-19 and how a resilient supply chain is not just a top priority for both of their committees, but is considered a matter of national security by Congress. Both lawmakers also emphasized the importance of rebuilding America's transportation infrastructure with critical freight industries top of mind. A more resilient economy and supply chain are paramount to developing the domestic capacity to deal with uncertainty. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and we hope to see you at part 2 of CQ Roll Call and Transport Topics Virtual Event Symposium in the coming months. For all the latest on transportation policy, visit rollcall.com or follow us on social at Roll Call.
And for the latest industry updates on trucking and freight, visit Transport Topics at www.ttnews.com. Thanks again for joining us for today's program.